Listen, you smell something?
Human emotions are materializing in the form of a viscous psychoreactive plasm with explosive supernormal potential.
What a discovery, a psychoreactive substance.
Do you know what this equipment is used for?
Boggle or Super Mario Brothers?
We'll have fun!
Yeah!
They're still doing it. Really quite good work there.
My friend, don't be a jerk.
We've got no choice. Call the Ghostbusters.
Super Jackpot!
Welcome to Extraplasm Podcast. It's the only podcast on the internet that thinks we should all be lobbying for Dan Aykroyd to record a Ghostbusters-inspired blues-style cover version of Queen's Fat Bottom Girls, and then to also make a music video for it where he rides the Ecto-C off into the sunset. I'm your host, Jim Maritato, aka Vank Maniac on the internet, and of course, keeper of bad music video ideas. And by now, I hope you have had the opportunity to see Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. If you haven't, what are you even doing here right now? Go watch the movie, come back, and then listen to this. But in all seriousness, I hope you've seen the movie and that you've had as much fun with Frozen Empire as I have over the last couple of weeks between premiere and, sort of public release week in the last week or so. And I also hope you've seen it because this week's episode features a roundtable review with our friends Jason Fitzsimmons of Ghostbusters News, Tony Taylor of Phantasm Toys, and Justin West from Strange Glow Video. We've now all seen the movie multiple times over and in our home theaters after watching it first in the premiere auditoriums in New York City. So this week we get into a deep level discussion about our takes on the movie after letting it sink in a few times over. We have a fun conversation where we weigh in with our reviews, our reactions to the critics' review scores, our reactions to the fandom's reactions, and we geek out a bit about our favorite parts of the movie and talk a bit about what it means for where ghostbusting is going next. So needless to say, this is a super spoilery conversation where we openly discuss plot points, dialogue, etc. If you still haven't seen Frozen Empire for some reason, you should totally fix that. But if you haven't yet and you're trying to stay spoiler free, be advised that you'll likely want to hold off on listening to this week's episode until after you've seen the movie. We'll get into that conversation with Jason and Tony and Justin in a few minutes. But first, before we can, we've got to address some Ghostbusters headlines, especially because we haven't in a few weeks.
Still making headlines all across the country, the Ghostbusters are at it again.
Today, the entire eastern seaboard is alive with talk of incidents of paranormal activity.
Phone-in topic today, ghosts and ghostbusting.
Extraplasm, read all about it. Ghostbusters headlines coming at ya.
At the top of the headlines segment this week, I want to discuss a quick housekeeping item that is really important for those of you who are listening to the podcast on Google Podcasts. By the time you listen to the next episode, Google Podcasts will no longer be a thing. It will have been sunset and discontinued and will no longer be a way for you to listen to episodes. Google is likely going to redirect you to check out episodes on YouTube Music as the alternative platform, which is all fine and dandy. But I will be honest in telling you that the effort it takes to produce the video version of the podcast, even though I don't use, cameras and film it, but I just take the audio version and create an animation to go along with it, it's pretty time consuming and often takes a couple of days for me to get around to. In fact, in recent weeks, you may have noticed that it took, in fact, 2 weeks for that to happen, given that I was on the road and didn't have access to Adobe Premiere and Adobe After Effects. So to be real, if you want to be listening to the podcast reliably and you've been on Google Podcasts, you may want to start to access it from Spotify or another platform. Or you can, of course, use the RSS feed directly with a different Android app. Because I am an Android user and I've had to deal with this pain myself, I can tell you that I've adopted the use of a new app called Pocket Casts in place of Google Podcasts, and it seems to be pretty good. In fact, it works really well with Android Auto and arguably better than Google Podcasts did. So you may want to check that out if you're in a similar situation, but just be advised, if you're a Google Podcast listener, you will not have access to your platform as of April 2nd, and you will need to find an alternative way to access your podcasts. So, keep in mind that Extraplasm is available on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, all those different places. And it will, of course, be on YouTube Music as well. It's just often going to be with a delay because of the time it takes to produce the video version of the podcast after the audio version. Okay, so that kind of covers our headlines segment, or rather housekeeping item in the headlines segment we need to talk about. So let's talk about some Ghostbusters Frozen Empire news. The weekend went pretty well for the film as it came in first at the box office and earned over $45.5 million domestically in box office take and another $16.4 million internationally for a total of $61.6 million. At the same time, the Ghostbusters franchise as a whole crossed the threshold. That's a pretty important milestone, as the release of Frozen Empire essentially pushed the franchise over $1 billion total in earned revenue since 1984. So that's kind of crazy to consider that in the last 40 years, Ghostbusters by itself alone has generated $1 billion in total revenue from box office. That doesn't include action figures. It doesn't include licensing. It doesn't include t-shirts or any of those things. Just the box office take, which is pretty wild. So let's hope the momentum continues throughout this week and next weekend to help further secure the success of Frozen Empire and potential future Ghostbusters projects. And don't forget, you can help go see the movie again if you've already seen it. I'm gonna go watch a 35mm print later on this week, and then I may go watch a 70mm print of the original Ghostbusters too. That's going to be available in Hollywood this week, which I had no idea about. So those of you who told me about that, thank you, because that's pretty awesome. It also seems we may see a little more content from Frozen Empire when it comes to home media releases later this year. In an interview with Collider, Gil Kenan commented on deleted content that was removed from the film, but that he's still hoping to bring to fans, saying, "There's only a couple of deleted scenes. Unfortunately, they're great scenes, so it's really hard to do, but they were really necessary to cut for shape and flow. They were fantastic scenes that came sort of too late in the film when you really wanted to watch the preparations for the final siege on the firehouse come together. I'm definitely including them in whatever extra materials come out later on because I'm proud of the scenes." He went on to additionally say that he wants audiences looking for an expanded universe with the film to be able to have those scenes and assess how they would have fit into the whole. However, when he was asked about the possibility of putting together an extended cut or a sort of director's cut of the film, he said, quote, "I'm not really an extended cut kind of guy. I believe that the film that comes out for audiences is forged by fire. The process of finishing the film is what makes the product." So we should expect that we may be able to see some additional scenes. If you're like wondering what happened to the number of red parkas, maybe you'll get to see more of them in some of those deleted scenes. Or, we may find out that there was more context or longer takes of some of the scenes we saw. What I think is interesting about this is when Afterlife came out, there was sort of not really a lot of discussion of deleted scenes or deleted content, even though we additionally suspected that there was likely more of that, within the fandom. People were talking about it. And in this case, I think that Jason Reitman held his cards a little closer to the vest on that and wasn't necessarily disclosing how much stuff might have been out there. Whereas in this case, Gil Kenan is openly talking about content that he hopes we get to see, even though he's not planning to do a different cut of the movie. So what will it be? When will we find out? Maybe when the Blu-rays come out in a few months. We'll talk about those in a few minutes. But there's some potentiality that maybe by the end of the year we'll get to see that content, or that maybe they'll hold it for a later release. But it is interesting to know that it's out there, and that within a week of the release of the movie, Gil is out talking about how he hopes to make it available. Now, beyond content coming out, while marketing for Frozen Empire has slowed down a little, and several of the promotional items and popcorn buckets we've been talking about for the last few weeks have sold out at the various theaters, the release of the movie has also brought us the release of tons of personal and behind-the-scenes photos and content. If you take a look at the Instagram accounts of McKenna Grace, Logan Kim, Emily Lind, Finn Wolfhard, Jason Reitman, Gil Kenan, Celeste O'Connor, Aryan Tuaten, Kevin Mangold, and many others who worked on the film, you'll find a lot of candids and selfies taken by the cast and crew over the months they made the film. Go do this. There's so much cool stuff out on Instagram that you can see of like just them hanging out on set in costume, and sort of behind the scenes photos of folks sort of puppeting Slimer doing funny things. It's really cute, and it gives you a sense of how much fun and love they had making this movie that we otherwise don't get to see. And now that the embargo against, sharing any of that stuff has kind of expired with the release of the film, everybody's able to, give us a glimpse of what they had the opportunity to do. So go check it out. There's tons of cool stuff for you to take a look at. Beyond the personal photos and candids that are being shared by cast and crew members of Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, you may also want to know about a couple other pieces of content out there that will show you some behind-the-scenes experiences. Two of those are going to come from Adam Savage's Tested channel over on YouTube, the first of which is a video where Adam gets a chance to examine the possessed props of Frozen Empire and essentially take a look at the way that the possessor ghosts functioned, or how the props that the possessor possessed, so to speak, came to life, how they worked, etc. The other video that he has out there is touring the research lab and containment unit set and sort of looking at how, those concepts were designed in universe. You can take a look at both of those over on the Tested channel on YouTube, or if you want to find them more easily because you don't want to dig through YouTube, head over to Ghostbusters News. Jason has a story on each of them. I have to admit to you that I have a lot of Tested videos to go back and look at, amongst other things, because I was skipping many of those videos to try and keep myself somewhat spoiler free going into the film. So you may be in the same boat as I am, where you have like 5 or 6 different videos you can go back and watch on Tested that you had forgot about, because I totally did. And there's a lot of behind the scenes content that you may have skipped over before that now is suddenly relevant after you see the movie. So, take a look at that if you want to. I'm definitely going to spend some time with that over the next week, sort of looking at more and more of that behind the scenes content. And if you want one more piece of behind the scenes content you can look at that's totally exclusive, our friends over at Yes Have Some Podcast, you may recall, visited the Frozen Empire set in London back in June of 2023. And when they were there, they had the opportunity to examine a proton pack from the movie in depth. This is something you definitely don't want to miss if you're into building screen accurate props and the like, because this is like, some of the most close-up high-resolution footage that you're probably going to get of the new Frozen Empire proton packs. So, take a look at this. You can go find their content over at youtube.com/@YHS podcast. And like and subscribe to what they've got coming out, because this Firehouse Friday series they have, where they've already put out a few different videos that you can take a look at as well, is really neat stuff. It was an opportunity for them to go over to London and be fans on set, but also be given the ability to sort of like document different things like making slime and visiting different sets, and sort of explaining how things like the proton pack work, etc. So go and check out the Yes Have Some content, and of course go check out the stuff from Tested. It's really cool. A final piece of sort of Frozen Empire media to know about for this week that's directly related to the film is that the soundtrack has now been released digitally by Sony Music Masters. So the digital copy of the Ghostbusters Frozen Empire soundtrack by Dario Marianelli is now available on Spotify and other delivery streaming platforms. You can go and take a look at that now and listen to it. Physical copies are not yet available, but will apparently be available on compact disc in the middle of April, according to Ghostbusters News. At this time, there's no other news available about whether or not it will see a vinyl release like the limited edition vinyl that came out for Ghostbusters Afterlife. But I would say keep your fingers crossed. Hopefully it's something they did for the last movie, so we can hope they'll do it for this one. But it's kind of cool. Like, we've reached the point where the movie's out, and that means that we get to start having things like soundtracks and behind the scenes stuff and candids that kind of build upon the experience that we're getting in the theater. And so go take a look at that content if you haven't already. It's kind of my way of saying slow burn your movie experience, because there's plenty of cool stuff to help you do it. Don't let this all pass you by and then be like, oh, I wonder what went on with, how they did any of that filming. The content is out there. We live in a time and an era where you can see all this great stuff. So don't leave it behind as you're sort of processing through the movie. In cartoon news, which is something we haven't really said before, Gil Kennan was interviewed by YouTube channel A Trip to the Movies in a video that's over 24 minutes long. And so you can kind of call this interview news, maybe one more piece of Frozen Empire news. And that's a great interview that offers some insights about the making of Frozen Empire and is thus worth checking out on its own merits. But it's also the first time we've seen Gil comment on the animated series in quite some time. He commented saying that he had, quote, just watched an entire art presentation for the show. I've seen the sets and the environments, and I just saw my first glimpse at a world of supernatural characters as realized by our brilliant creative team. All I can say is the work is being done as we speak. It's in what we call full development. Scripts are being written, art is being created, and it's a great time to be a Ghostbuster. So the Netflix series that we're talking about here, of an animated cartoon series, we don't really know what the premise of this is yet. We haven't seen a single glimpse of it. So to hear that it's in the works is good, because it's the most recent update we've had probably since they first announced it at Ectofest in 2022. Is that right? At this point. So that's something to consider, that the animated series is still coming. I am kind of intrigued by the notion that he says that he just saw his first glimpse at a world of supernatural characters, and is whether that means this is going to be a cartoon that follows the Ghostbusters, or whether it's going to be a cartoon that takes place in the ghost world, which is an idea that's been kicked around before for an animated movie. So we'll see, but it's good to know the cartoon is still in the works. It hasn't somehow disappeared or gotten caught up in red tape, and that with the success of Frozen Empire, hopefully it means that there'll be a lot of, sort of strong weight thrown behind it to help it succeed. In comic book news, which is another expression we haven't said in a while, today's the day the new Dark Horse Comics Ghostbusters miniseries begins. Titled Ghostbusters Back in Town, the 4-part miniseries had its first issue released to the public as of today, with 1 issue a month following between now and June. If you head over to the Ghostbusters News website, you can check out 6 preview pages that have been provided by Dark Horse to get a glimpse of what this comic book looks like, and sort of the first pages of this issue to sort of give you a scope of what the story is about. And if you keep your eyes peeled on Extraplasm, you may just find that some folks who worked on the book might join us over the next few weeks. Keep your fingers crossed. An additional reminder to keep in mind is that if you are in the Los Angeles area today, as you're listening to the podcast and the day it comes out, you can actually come and get your book signed at a local comic book store. We Can Be Heroes Comics on DeSoto Avenue in Chatsworth will be hosting David Boer and 3 Slimers, Robin Shelby, Mark Brian Wilson, and Kevin Mangold, as well as Billy Bryan. They'll all be signing on location. David will be signing the comic book, as my understanding, if with a purchase of a book. The other folks will be signing, but maybe charging for their signatures individually. We don't have details on that, but I can tell you that if you want to come out, you're in the LA area, if you want to meet the folks, if you want to meet David Boer, who wrote the book, if you want to meet the, Mr. Stay Puft or any of the Slimers, you can come out to We Can Be Heroes comic book store between 3 and 8 p.m. on the 27th of March, the day the podcast is released. If you're not in the LA area, this should not stop you from going to your local comic book store. There may not be any Slimers there, but there should still be a book that you can pick up and enjoy. In video game news, there's quite a bit to talk about, as Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed has had its 5th downloadable content update released just 24 hours before the podcast dropped. This is the big DLC that has been inspired by Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. There are a whole bunch of great, cool things that have been added to the game as a result of the release of the movie, including the ability to play as Garaka. Garaka has been added as a new member of the Overlord ghost type. So essentially, if you've played with the other Overlord ghost that throws a spear, this is very kind of similar mechanics. Instead of creating a sort of weird plasma chamber of cage stuff, this one creates ice when you throw the spear at Ghostbusters and, kind of hit them with it. This is a lot of fun, to sort of play as Garaka. There's different aspects of the game that are also affected by the Frozen Empire release. The firehouse is frozen over in game. Some of the levels are frozen over when you play in bounty mode. And there's a whole bunch of other just fun stuff, like t-shirts for the Repossessed show from Ghostbusters Frozen Empire that your character can wear, or t-shirts for Melody Diner, which is kind of hilarious and kind of awesome, because that's not something that we see anywhere else. Like, there are no t-shirts of that currently being produced in the catalog of various stuff on the Ghostbusters store, yet it exists inside the game, which is sort of fun. And I've said this, like, that game is amazing. It's so fun to play, and it's something where, you got to keep in mind, like, it's the home of the original walking trash bag. Frozen Empire, has a pretty important scene with a possessor ghost that's trying to run away, containing a wax cylinder inside of a trash bag, and the trash bag comes to life and runs off into the distance. Well, that's a thing you can do in Spirits Unleashed and have been able to do for 18 months. Possess a trash bag, run around, get people to chase you. It's fun. There's some other really cool stuff in the game that you can go take a look at. Very new proton pack shells that are going to look like the ones from the movie. New colorways and things that you can pick up. So go check this out. This is a really cool update. And what's also really awesome is that, as in addition to the DLC release, they've also over at IllFonic announced that they have a year 2 roadmap for additional free downloadable content. this is kind of great. Like, this is something where nobody's been asked to pay a single dime to be able to access any of this content after the original price that people paid for the game. Yet we've now been told, as a result of an announcement from IllFonic, that not only, are we getting Garaka and gear shells and cosmetics and a Twitch drop for, a new character, or rather a new ghost colorway this spring, but to mark the 40th anniversary of Ghostbusters, there's also going to be a Frozen Empire Slimer that's going to be added into the game, a real Ghostbusters version of Slimer added in the game, a classic version of Slimer added in the game. So 3 different Slimers that will be added in that will have different functionality. And some Twitch drops. In the fall, they're going to be offering up something called Bounty for the Ages, with a new bust that's happening at the county courthouse level, with new gear shells, new cosmetics, and new Twitch drops. And finally, in the winter, they have said, quote unquote, community feedback has been integral to the success of Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed. And we've taken that into account for this DLC. Stay tuned for the chilling reveal of a fan favorite ghost. So it's somebody who we haven't seen yet, but it's a ghost that we've been asking for, and it's a special ghost reveal. Will it be the Boogeyman? Will it be, potentially Sandman? Who knows? Like, it could be any of these. But what's really cool is that we are literally like going into a full second year of support for this game, where nobody's had to pay a dime. And it's something that is kind of amazing when you really think about it. Go check out the new DLC for Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed. It's a lot of fun. And, you can now, play as Garaka and offer up the death chill to people and freeze them in place and then smack them around and do all the things you can do as a ghost in that game that are fun. In addition to the updates that are happening for Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed this week, there's also updates happening for Rise of the Ghost Lord, the VR game that's available for MetaQuest and PlayStation VR hardware. Apparently, in this new update, you're also going to see Garaka added to the game with attacking San Francisco, where that game is set. And there's going to be people added to this game, including Ray Stantz, played by Dan Aykroyd, Lars Pinfield, Lucky, Podcast. Apparently, the Firehouse in New York will be a playable environment, which it hasn't been before because the entire game takes place in San Francisco. So this is pretty cool. The Rise of the Ghost Lord game is something I have to admit that I have very little experience with. So as much as I've played way too much of Spirits Unleashed in my life, I have played only a few minutes of Rise of the Ghost Lord. So here's my advice. If you want to see what that's like, and you want to know what that update is, go follow Ghostbusters News, because Jason Fitzsimmons absolutely has a copy of that game and has the hardware to play it and will document it for sure. But expect that if you do have that yourself, you have an update coming that's going to expand the world pretty significantly for you and add in some of your fan favorite characters, all this week, which is pretty great. In Ghostbusters licensed merchandise news, turns out that if you want to get a copy of Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, you can pre-order one now. You, of course, won't get it for many months, but believe it or not, if you're looking to pick up the 4K Ultra HD Steelbook or the Blu-ray with digital copies, those are now available for pre-order over on Amazon. The Steelbook is going to set you back about $55.99. You can also buy a non-Steelbook version of the 4K Ultra HD release for a little less money, about $45. So, if I'm you, I'm buying the $55.99 because it's got everything I want: the 4K Ultra HD, the Blu-ray, and digital copies of the film, all in a cool, awesome, Steelbook on which the art is not yet final, but it'll be cool. Let's be real. So if you want to pick up your Frozen Empire stuff and know that it's ordered now, so you don't have to worry about it later in the year, head over to Amazon and go ahead and pre-order that before they run out of those. And that's one of those key things, is that we all get upset when the Steelbook is gone. So don't miss out on it. And remember, you're pre-ordering with Amazon, so if the price goes down, they will honor that. They'll lower it for you. Additionally, the Trick or Treat Studios has announced that they have their line of stuff they've been previewing for a while. We knew there was a Ghostbusters light up sign that was coming from them, and a few other items like masks that have been previewed in the past that Ghostbusters News has had featured. We now have had that whole line revealed to us. It includes a whole bunch of different stuff, including a no ghost light up sign for $120. A Ghostbusters Slimer wall breaker, which is kind of awesome. It looks like Slimer is flying through your wall and he glows and lights up. That'll run you $375, which is not so awesome. It's a lot of money for that, but it's a pretty cool thing if you want it for your house or for your Halloween decor. They also have a Terror Dog wall breaker that's very similar, of a Terror Dog coming to the wall for $2.99. And then they've got a variety of different masks that are really high quality. A Slimer mask that'll run you $75, a Stay Puft mask that'll run you $60, a bunch of different pins, wrapping paper if you want that in your life, so that way you can buy this stuff and then wrap it in the paper. That's another thing you can pre-order. So head over to Trick or Treat Studios to take a look at their website. They have a bunch of great stuff on pre-order right now. And if you want to take a look at some of that without, with some greater coverage and some explanation, you can head over to Ghostbusters News and take a look at Jason's ongoing coverage of what Trick or Treat has up for offer. In unofficial merch news, things that are unlicensed, the Containment Unit Autograph Collecting Group, also known as TCU Collectibles. You may know them as Matt Sanders and Tom Henry. They have a signing with Kurt Fuller that closes on April 15th, which means that you are just about 2 weeks away from needing to finalize that if you want to get something. Kurt Fuller, of course, plays Jack Hardemeyer in Ghostbusters 2, as well as, people in No Holds Barred and Wayne's World and a variety of other things. But for our purposes, you probably want him because you want to complete your, Ghostbusters 2 autograph set. So just be advised that if you want to be able to get an 8x10 or an 11x14 or to mail in a personal item, that you likely need to act pretty quickly because you've got less than 2 weeks to get that done. The cost of signing for any item is $50. If you're getting 8x10s, the cost of printing is $5. If you're getting 11x14s, the cost is $8. If you're getting trading cards, the cost is $5. And if there's any other requests like personalization or character names, that may cost you an additional $10. You can work out all of this if you want to find out how to get your stuff sent in and how to get your autographs done. Email slimedsignatures@gmail.com. That's the way to place an order or ask questions. And, we've had Matt and Tom on the podcast a bunch of different times. They're both great people. I've talked a ton about how great of a job they do of getting people's autographs handled. So, if you want to get Kurt Fuller done because you've never had the opportunity before and you don't know when you're going to again, which is the truth, you should get it done. Get in contact with them ASAP. And finally, the final piece of unlicensed merchandise for the week, Phantasm Toys, our friend Tony Taylor, who's on this week's episode, and Brendan Pearce of Badoochi Studios, who provides our logo. They have some really cool stuff that's coming out right now. They have a Class 10 Library Lady re-release that they're doing, which has kind of been upgraded. It's in a new colorway with a more translucent resin and has a light inside of it. So now it glows, which is totally cool. You can take a look at their Class 10 Library Lady figure, which is the closest you're going to get to having a Maddie Collector or Plasma Series librarian figure. Of course, there is a prototype of the Maddie Collector librarian figure, which I own one of and is very cool, but that's not a thing you're ever going to see in general release. And so to be real, like the Class 10 Library Lady figure that Phantasm does is the closest approximation to the Eleanor Twitty librarian that's ever been released, for sale. So if you need one of those, if you have missed out on it in the past, don't miss out on it now. Go get it. The other thing you can grab from Phantasm right now is they have a Frozen Firehouse figurine. And this is essentially a celebratory firehouse that is about 3 inches tall, that is a replica of the one that they gave out at the Yes Have Some party and the premiere events. Tony had produced about 40 of those that had the date of the premiere on them. These do not have the date on them, but they are virtually identical, except that they don't have the date and the event printed on them, and instead have Garaka on one side of the firehouse where the date would be. So it's a pretty cool little figurine that celebrates the release of the movie, and that fits right alongside your Crypt Creepers figures and other stuff, sort of in the Phantasm line. So go and take a look over at those things at phantasmtoys.com. Support them. They, of course, support Extraplasm and do great stuff. And it's always fun to have Tony and Brendan on the show. And their stuff is amazing. If you've ever seen me do kitchen counter reviews, I always say this, that Tony and Brendan are really super detail oriented and do outstanding work in everything they produce. Okay, so that about covers our headlines for this week. So let's go now to my conversation with Jason Fitzsimmons, Tony Taylor, and Justin West as we sort of unpack our multiple viewings of Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Joining me at Extraplasm Podcast, a panel of people who are awesome. 3 guests joining us to talk about Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Because, I mean, of course, we spent 3.5 hours last week talking about it, but that you didn't think we were done, did you? Because we're not, especially because now we've seen it multiple times. In the virtual studio with us, Tony Taylor of Phantasm Toys, Justin West of Strange Glow Video, and, of course, coming back because he didn't have enough torture already talking about this movie with me and spending a week with me almost in person, Jason Fitzsimmons of Ghostbusters News. Gentlemen, how are we doing? Tony, we'll start with you. How are things going?
It's going great. I'm still coming down from the high of New York City in the premiere and still processing the movie even after seeing it 3 times and being able to just actually enjoy it. And it's a great time to be a fan.
Yeah, how many of us present watched the movie the first time while looking straight up at the ceiling?
Present. Yeah.
You can't raise your hands. You have to be verbal. But 3 of us, I think, watched it in the front row movie theater the first time. So be able to watch it in a different context is probably kind of helpful this week. Not that it was bad watching it that way, but it's just, obviously you see a lot more when you're not in the front row. So I hear you on that.
Yeah, I think I was in the 3rd or 4th row and I was probably, I was on the far left. So when I went and saw it on IMAX this weekend and I sat in the middle, at the perfect height, there's a lot of things I noticed that I didn't see the first time.
Yeah, you didn't see, right? Justin, how are you doing?
I'm excellent. I'm still living the hype of Frozen Empire here. So excited to be on with the show. And seeing the movie the second time, I liked it even more than I liked it the first time. Kind of scratching my head about the weird vibes going on in the community. And I always circle back to the people that don't understand, you're the reason there's a river of slime in Ghostbusters 2. You're so removed from reality. I'm the slime's flown to your house.
Yeah, we'll talk about this a bit. I'm going to admit that I've kind of have separated myself a bit from some of those reactions by just kind of choosing where to go and where not to go. And we'll get into that a little bit. But you're also have been on a little bit of almost like a Ghostbusters podcast tour. You have your own show, Strange Glow Video. You were on the Cross Rip, the Interdimensional Cross Rip podcast with Troy Benjamin and Chris Stewart's show, obviously, that you were on recently, and now you're here. So I feel like you're the most well-traveled Ghostbusters podcaster right now.
Least respected, most well-traveled.
Hey, no one said least respected at all. If you're on everybody's show, then everybody must respect you for some reason, right? That's more the way to think about it.
That's true. That's true. I just, we always bring ourselves down a little bit. That's our sense of humor at our show. So, no, with Cross Rip, I love those guys. And man, to get the opportunity to join their show as someone who's listened to them since they started, it was oh yeah, I have to throw my name in the hat. It's like inviting yourself over to a sleepover. You hear somebody's having a fun time and you're like, hey guys, I'd love to come over too. But, willing things into existence in the universe. So I appreciate the invite.
I think the way that works is if you leave enough voicemails on the Cross Rip line, eventually they just call you back. They're like, hey, you left so many messages. You should just be on the show now. I don't know. But
I should just record entire podcasts on their voicemail for them. Here's a whole show
hilarious.
for you.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I would listen to that. I love the Cross Rip. I'll listen to it if you're on it. If you're, you're not on it, whoever's on it, it's always great. So, and Jason, we talked a week ago for 3.5 hours about this movie.
Yeah.
Yet you've come back for more punishment. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Same as Justin kind of right now, kind of navigating the response of Frozen Empire. It's been quite interesting to see the comments, both people that are huge fans of it and then others that aren't necessarily, sharing that same vibe. But I have also partaken in the film a second time now, and gotta say, I love it more than I did a week ago.
Yeah, I feel very similarly. I think that the first time you watch the movie as a deep level Ghostbusters fan, there's this thing that goes on where you are looking for the stuff you think you're supposed to look for. If you've watched all the trailers and you've looked at any of the marketing, then you go, oh, these are the things that are going to be in this movie, as opposed to treating those particular pieces of media as indicators of what this film is about. Right. And so I think it's weird. I think you're right that both you and Justin have sort of said, hey, there's a sort of navigating of reactions to things. And we're going to talk about this a bit, but I think my second viewing of this film, I liked a lot more because I was no longer looking to see what was going to be in it that I had expected to see. And now I knew like, okay, well, this is what is in the movie and I could just sit back and enjoy the story. And it's kind of like been an odd thing for me to consider of whether or not like ramping up interest in references and Easter eggs in a process of marketing is necessarily a good thing. Like, because it means that people who are really into those Easter eggs and those references and like capturing a moment of, fulfilling like this absent referent thing, this rhetorical thing of like, hey, somebody told you about this thing to expect and it fills in your understanding of meaning. And so you want that blank filled in for you. If that's a good thing or if it's something to sort of like pull back from in terms of how movie marketing works. But like, we can get into that later. But I kind of like, I don't know. I think you're right. Like seeing it a second time, I enjoyed the movie a lot more because I was no longer sitting there going, well, why aren't the red parkas lighting up? Like, or any of these random things that somebody could nitpick about that just don't matter. They don't matter about in terms of the story that's being told.
Yeah. Well, even regarding the story too, like there are certain elements of that were not in those trailers or in those early scenes, such as the dynamic, kind of the friendship relationship, if it were, between like Phoebe and Melody. Right. And it's something where there was like little nuances that I totally missed. I did not catch in the first viewing. And then I went back and watched and I was like, oh, you know what? Maybe there is more to this than that I didn't actually catch the first time.
Yeah. I agree. And like, we're going to get into this. I'm sure that like we've all kind of had different experiences with this movie at this point. All four of us, I think, saw this movie the first time in an AMC in New York City, saturated in total fan craziness in the moment. Jason, you and I were coming off of like literally talking to people and trying to hold it together while filming, 2-minute segments with
Baby,
different
we were
stars
saturated in Gil Kinnan and Jason Reitman's saliva. They were talking. Oh man, woo!
Yes, good and time. That soda, that entire Stay Puft full of soda that you spilled. Shout out to the AMC workers who cleaned it up.
Actually, I mean, besides that, I mean, Bill Murray did douse us in water, so I mean that's one good reason. But yes. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. The actual mini puffed, what are they called? Sipper cups? Is that what they're called? Yeah, they're wonderful to look at, but functionality a little bit to be desired.
The rule of that device, having now, I'm going to admit to you, I've used it several times because I'm that kind of person who came home and went, yes, of course I'm going to fill this with Diet Coke and continue to drink out of it like a child. You got to grab it by the foot. Like if you hold it by the foot, then you're good. They got to treat it like a handle. But if you grab it by the head, you're doomed. It's a bad move. It's not going to work out well for you. Like it's just bad. But you're right. It's an engineering fault. It's not really your fault. It's bad design, but it's still adorable. I'm still glad I have one. But I've now watched the movie in different contexts where we were not, randomly running up to buy Stay Puft merchandise after trying to get things signed and or trying to interview people on carpets and being totally saturated in the moment. And I think we've all had an opportunity to ruminate on it. How many times have we all seen the movie now?
I'm at 2.
You're at 2?
I got 3 in.
Okay.
I'm at 2.
I'm at 3. And I think I may have pulled the most strategic move ever. I went to a Cinemark. I watched the movie in D-Box, which if you don't know what that is, I had never done it before. And I was like, I'm going to do this because I have Cinemark membership and I had coupons for it. It's haptic feedback seats. So like the seat vibrates and shakes, but also tilts during portions of the movie. And that means that like when the movie opens with the Ecto 1 chase, like your seat tilts with the Ecto 1. And I was like, oh, this is totally cool. So I really enjoyed that screening. And then I literally set myself up to walk out of that, walk to the lobby, use the restroom, throw out my trash, get a beer from the concession stand, and walk into a Cinemark XD screening as the Sony logo popped up on the screen. Like completely missed all the trailers and just went from one screening straight to the next. Like on Thursday when the movie kind of public released in the afternoon. And I think, like, I don't know, I'll ask you how you feel about this, both of you, or all of you. Having seen it in different places, in different contexts, I feel like the movie almost plays better on a smaller screen. Like Gil Kennan was posting and saying like, go see it on the biggest and loudest screen you can possibly find this weekend. And I love Gil Kennan, but I read that message and I went, I really enjoyed my smaller screen experience more than my big one. And I don't know if it's because I was in a seat that moved, which was also part of the element here. But like, I just felt like this movie almost feels like an hour and 45 minute sort of episode. And so the smaller format to me felt more like an episode intimate kind of experience, whereas the bigger the screen was, the more I felt like I was trying to struggle to take everything in. And I just wonder how you all feel about that.
So I'll jump in here. So seeing it on IMAX, right, really stood out because New York felt big. The scenes they shot in New York felt big. It felt real, especially having just been there. So to me, that really stood out. But to your point, I think a lot of the rest of the movie, once you're out of that Ecto-1 chase scene, feels like a smaller screen would be a very acceptable way to watch this. Like watching this at home, the replay value is very, very high for me. Like I think I'm just going to keep seeing new things over and over. But that IMAX screening, like center row for me, really, I was very happy. I was by myself. I didn't have anyone next to me. Like it was just like, take it all in. Nice. And like, that was a great way to absorb it and take in details that I missed the first round.
I think just the movie in general just has so much going on that it requires a second viewing. Like just to be able to, level your expectations, know what to look for and all that. I don't think it really, not to me matters what the size of the screen is. I just think in general, the second viewing, it's just so much better because you can understand the story better and you know what you're looking for and your expectations are set at the appropriate level. Like the first time I saw it, I was one of those people I was kind of disappointed in the finale and with how much it came together just because of things that I already had in my head from seeing in trailers and such. Like I was expecting more of a rooftop scene. I thought there was going to be another step the finale was going to take because I know I've seen things in a trailer and I haven't seen them yet. They're coming. And then for it to be over, I'm like, oh, that was it. But the second time I saw it, the finale didn't feel as rushed. And I knew when it was kind of building up and what to kind of expect and look for. And it felt like even though it still has its problems and it gets a little sloppy and maybe with edits and whatever happened to it, but it didn't feel as rushed the second time. It was way more enjoyable.
It's interesting you say that because I think also like, look, we're super fans, right? So we all probably went into this movie knowing how long it was going to be, right? Like, oh, it's an hour and 45, right? Like I know how much time I have like with this movie before it's over. And so as you're sitting there watching the movie, you kind of have almost like the first time this conscious understanding that like the sand is running through the hourglass. And I haven't seen the slime blower yet, or I haven't seen this yet, right? Like, and the reality is by the end of the movie, like, I mean, Jason, I think you and I were talking about this the other night that like, I don't know where the slime blower is in the movie. I don't know that I've seen it in the movie at all. And I think that you commented and said that like somebody has said to you that it's somewhere in the background of the research lab.
I did see it. I saw it my third time. I finally found where it's at.
Yeah. So I saw it the first time just because I knew where it was I assume that was the same shot from the trailers, that it was just that background shot as they kind of walk through, they saw someone testing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's right. That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
It's in the same tank when Lucky is testing the gauntlet thrower and she blasts that wooden cutout of a ghost.
Gotcha.
She's literally getting dangerously close. There's a slime blower right in the corner right there where Trevor walks up on the other side and is like pounding on the glass. There's a slime blower sitting in that tank with her. It's right there. Like they're being very reckless with that blasting and testing right next to the slime blower. But there's one right there for sure.
But in contrast to the notion that like every influencer who went to the set put on a slime blower.
Yeah.
Right. Like we got video footage of all these people going like, look, slime blowers are in the movie, such that people were like joking, like, look, Ghostbusters 2 is finally canon. And it's like, it's been canon the whole time. But like, it's just kind of funny to me, like that there was sort of this difference in terms of what we saw in terms of content versus what we saw in marketing. But it is like that separation, like, and Jason, I want to give you a chance to hop in here on this because I didn't mean to sort of cut you out of answering this question, but
I think to some degree though, I mean, I gotta kind of commend Sony in that, in the respects that I think they kind of handled their marketing quite well in the respects that they knew what they were doing. I think when it came to, okay, throw these slime blowers on influencers' back, hardcore, the dedicated Ghostbuster fans, they're going to lose their minds. Ghostbusters 2 canon. I mean, it always was, but they're going to lose their minds over the slime blower being back. And that's going to get their butts into seats, right? Like, and even though they didn't play a massive role in the film, I know some people were like, oh, they should turn them into like a flamethrower slime blower and all this stuff, which would have been kind of cool. And I mean, toyetic. I think Sony played it quite nice in this. I mean, maybe not the most honest in terms of, hey, Lucky's going to get frozen. And then you go watch the movie and, hey, Lucky's not going to get frozen. Little things like that. But I don't know. I'm kind of curious exactly how much changed from before and after those reshoots. Exactly how much of that narrative, how much of that story kind of got altered. But I do kind of agree, though. There were those certain parts. Again, Lucky's moment. There was the rooftop with everybody wearing coats and everything. Just those things I was kind of looking out for. And watching it for the second time and knowing that ending is coming, I know you kind of said, saying through the hourglass, it does feel a little bit smoother now when it comes to that build to the third act. It's not perfect by any means, but it definitely is a lot smoother when you know that it is coming.
Yeah, I think that it's still kind of rushed to, some extent. I think that there is a legitimate sort of consistent thing that I hear from folks of feeling like the third act happens very quickly. And I think that's still true after, even after a second and third viewing. But I will also say this, like, I'm a Doctor Who fan, and Doctor Who can threaten the entirety of time and space in 45 minutes. And I will tolerate that. I will deal with the fact that, like, the Doctor will flip some switches and whip out a sonic screwdriver and say some, speechy things. And all of a sudden, a giant threat to the entire universe goes away in about 3.5 minutes, And so looking at this, like the movie, to me, almost, what we've been hearing repeatedly for months is it's like a real Ghostbusters episode. I went, yeah, no, that it totally is. Like the end of a real Ghostbusters episode is the same kind of thing where it's like, there's a threat in the last 3 to 4 minutes. You're going to get like, Egon realizes we can do a thing really quick, like recast these parts in brass, right? And we're going to do that really fast. It's going to happen in a really quick animated montage. And then they're going to solve the day. Like they're going to, solve the problem and save the day. And then we're going to watch the credits. There's going to be some little funny joke at the end with Slimer doing something that he's not supposed to be doing. We all laugh about it. And then we cut to the credits where they, go down the street doing little Ghostbusters Rockettes kick dance. And so, we didn't get that in the movie. If that had been the credits, honestly, I probably would have laughed really hard. Like if they had just been like the entire family of Ghostbusters people, 10 people, all arm in arm doing the Rockettes dance down the street would have been perfect. But like, I think a little willing to forgive that rushed third act, if that makes sense, because I think it's the visual language of the movie, the narrative of the movie all seems smaller screen and episodic to me, even if people want to see it on the biggest screen,
Yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment, right? When you're looking at this movie, that last act does go very quickly, but to your point, it's very extreme Ghostbusters, real Ghostbusters. And I would say even more so extreme, because extreme seemed to like cut that down to like 2 to 3 minutes, it seems like, in an episode, right? Because you're looking at 21, 22 minutes usually on average.
Yeah.
And they'd kind of have that like real fast kind of thing going on to wrap things down. And when you look at overall screen time and you compare Vigo's screen time with Gozer's screen time and everything else, it makes a lot of sense. But I think the marketing put some reality distortion on things because, obviously editing a movie is very difficult. We all know that. Sometimes you shoot additional things there to throw off the story because you don't want to spoil everything in there.
Right.
There's a lot of things that you just don't always know about. But there's a few things I was really pleased they didn't throw in the trailers at all, which were fun surprises for me. Obviously, the Fire Master was great. Didn't know anything about that. Didn't know anything about Melody. Like, there's two huge things that, like, I'm not really seeing people talk about. I'm like, that wasn't none of the marketing. To me, like, that was huge because when I go back to Afterlife and I see the last trailer where Egon's driving the Shandor mining truck, which makes less sense because that's an abandoned company that shouldn't have a truck that's driving anymore. But you're watching this and it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, this all kind of makes sense. And this has a good feel to it once you kind of understand what's going on. And there's surprises, genuine surprises that I had no idea were coming. And so I really appreciated that. And I guess the other piece too is that I haven't seen people really talking about the Fire Master. I thought that was the most controversial thing in the movie, and I haven't seen anyone talk about it. I'm like, if you're a fan of real Ghostbusters or extreme Ghostbusters, we see all kinds of interesting characters, and that fits right into that world building. On the big screen, though, but I think maybe because of the Marvel movies getting as advanced as they have, people just don't question that type of stuff in movies right anymore. Maybe we're just comfortable with it.
Can I start a little thing I'm going to be terrible about this entire episode called things I was right about, and it makes me really happy.
Yeah, go for it. Here we are. What's the first one?
I said many episodes ago, somebody out there who listens to Extraplasm more carefully than I do is going to email me and be like, these are the episode numbers. And then I'll be like, great, make a chronology of this and do a supercut. But I said months ago that I could see Kumail coming in and playing the role in a similar way to the way he did in Obi-Wan. Like in Obi-Wan, he comes into that series and he's like a fake Jedi who's like trying to sell the idea that he's a Jedi for profit and stuff. And you kind of look at him and go, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Like, what's his deal? But by the end of the Obi-Wan miniseries, like he is there as one of the, he's not actually a Jedi, right? But like he's there as one of the heroes who helps to save the day and like takes up the cause and becomes like part of the team, like helping out Obi-Wan. And so I thought it was really interesting because it was like, what if they do that in this movie and they bring him in the same capacity and he's there and we get the sense that he's there like as an agent of chaos, but it turns out that he's like actually part of solving the problem. And boom, we get to like the part where he's the fire master. And I was like, that's what they did. They did exactly that. That's awesome. So yeah.
It does feel, I think his character would have been like, if he didn't do such a good job and was so funny, like if people didn't like his character overall, I think it would be a lot harder pill to swallow with him being at the end and everything. Like if he was just, but he kills it. Like he's one of the best additions to the cast and stuff, and kind of steals the show for me at least. So I think, yeah, they kind of warned us, and he was the one who kind of warned us, was it's very much inspired by the real Ghostbusters. So if you go into it thinking that, you should have no problem. And Vigo was a magician, so that's kind of magic and stuff right there. He wasn't like a god and stuff. He was just, and I think they do a good enough job of setting up the lore of Garak and everything for when that happens. It's not too bad, or too shocking at least.
I think they do a great job too at bringing Kumail's role into it, just because, I mean, they give him such great scenes, like great comedic scenes, great moments with those beloved characters, like with Peter Venkman and such. So it's really easy to kind of just accept him, like he's this kind of bumbling, I don't want to say Louis Tully type, but I think there's a couple parallels there in terms of he's out of his element. He doesn't, you could definitely find almost anybody else and they would be better for the job. They'd be better fitted for, what's going to happen here. But yeah, he totally nailed it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. They gave that Louis Tully vibe without rewriting that character, right? It wasn't like a rehash, because here's this guy that's really just doing anything he can to get by and survive. He's almost like Venkman in the first one. He's like that game show host, right? Just telling you what you want to hear to make the money. And so to have him in a scene with Venkman was great.
One of my favorite things about his character is when they go in his apartment and he says, I'm an authorized third-party reseller of sneakers, right? And then he proceeds to say, what size are you? And Trevor says, I'm a size 10. He goes, do you think you could fit yourself into a size 8? Right? And he's just like, he's so smarmy and so like, but also ready to like respond in the moment to keep the hustle moving. And so it's like almost funny. Like you're right. Like in some ways he almost is kind of like an alternate Venkman in that hustle sense. And so when you put him then like against Bill Murray in that scene where like, Venkman is trying to test him. And really what, if you think about what he's doing, right, is like he's reinforcing him negatively to test his ESP potential. Like he's lulling him into a sense of security to see how things go. And then he's hucking pens in his face.
Well, and the foreshadowing there, like I didn't even catch that foreshadowing the first time until I watched it again, when he's moving the flame in the background and everyone keeps stopping to look at it. And they're like, oh, what's he doing? And you're like, oh, that's great. Like, that's why that second viewing is so much more enjoyable for me, because you know what to expect and you can catch on to those cues that you missed the first round.
Right. There's even more foreshadowing for that too. At the very beginning, when he turns the orb in and he's walking down the street with the money in his hand, behind him, the street vendor, the cart guy, his grill's flame is going crazy and it's kind of flickering right towards Kumail's character, and he turns around and it stops. And I didn't notice that till the third time.
Oh, good call.
But you're right. Like it's a thing where like he is anxious about what has just happened and the transaction that just took place. And during it, the fire that's around him is acting erratically. Right. Like, and you would never notice it until you get to the third viewing. And to me, like that is as a Ghostbusters fan, I'm like, oh, this is like finding out that the pan and scan version cut out Egon holding up the number 4 on his cheek for years and years and years, and then finally seeing it again in widescreen and going, oh my God, there's an entire visual joke here that I would otherwise miss. You know, like, so like I really think that, like, look, I'm probably gushing about this already, but like I liked this movie a lot. Like I really think it's great. Like I don't know what critics think audiences want, because like Rotten Tomatoes to me at this point is like basically the Alta Vista of movie reviews. Like it's the web crawler, you know, like of like where to find out anything about a movie as far as I'm concerned, because I'm like, everyone, I get it. I'm like, I'm surrounded by Ghostbusters fans, but like, I mean, this is real. Like, I'm not even like making this up. Like, oh, I'm just telling some fun story. Like my brother and I, who has apparently been listening to the podcast. So shout out Brian. Like I didn't know he was listening to the podcast. Right. And he told me, like, sends me a message and goes, hey, I listened to the podcast. I got to the point where you said, you know, you're going to talk about the movie and spoil it. And then I decided I'm going to go to the movie. So he put the podcast on pause, got his wife, and they went to the movies and go, you know, watch the movie. And my brother, who's like not a huge Ghostbusters fan, and who was like probably like my lead in for him, he's a huge Rangers fan. So I was like, dude, when they go to the vape shop, take a look at the jersey the Fire Master in the vape shop is wearing, because it's like a Rangers throwback legacy jersey. And I'm like, what's up with that? Who did that? I want to talk to the person who made that costuming choice. But like, he called me afterwards as a person who's not a huge Ghostbusters fan, and he was like, that was really fun. Like, it was a really good movie. Like, really enjoyed it. And then he turned around and said, hey, did you notice the guy outside the library is the same guy from the first movie who, like, when they go in for the library? And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe you noticed this. Right. But like, he loved this movie. He thought it was fun. He thought it was good. Right. Like, and everyone I've talked to who's not necessarily even like a deep Ghostbusters person who's just watched the movie over the weekend has come out of being like, yeah, I really enjoyed it. And so I'm like, I'm really puzzled by, like, on the one hand, what Rotten Tomatoes critics have to say about it. And on the other hand, like, what some people in the fandom are kind of losing their minds about, as if like some terrible thing happened, or if they're, you know, Ghostbusters has been ruined for them in some way. And I'm like, I don't get it. Like, it was a really good, fun movie, and it was a fun romp, you know? I don't know. But
yeah, I think people take it way too serious, right? It's not Star Wars in the fact that, like, there's all this specific lore that's telling very, very specific stories. Like Ghostbusters, the way I was raised on it was real Ghostbusters carried the way. Like, right, I had the VHS as a little kid. I watched it a lot, but, you know, I'd watch the Slimer scene. I'd fast forward to the end. Like, the in-between stuff wasn't as fun because it was all the talking. Like, I want to see the ghost getting caught. As an adult, like, you know, the humor's there. And so I think a lot of people just are lost on the fact that this is kind of a hybrid movie. It shouldn't be taken serious, right? It's not like the world's going to end. Well, the world's always going to end, right? You know, you just need to listen to Ray and Afterlife. There's always something out there, you know? It's very true. But you just got to level set expectations and go in and be ready to have fun. I think, to me, the part about reviews that has bothered me, not just even with this movie, but lately, is that it just feels like an attack on the movie industry. Like, you want the movie industry to succeed. Like, this is big business. And so you need to have, like, the mindset of, like, maybe change your perspective as a reviewer, right? And it's partly internet culture, right? Because the internet culture brings out the worst in everyone.
Right.
And your viewpoint is obviously always reinforced because clickbait ads and cookies and everything on the internet know what you like. So if they know that you love Ghostbusters, yeah, we're going to see all the ads. But if they know you hate Star Wars and you say, I don't ever want to see this again, they're going to reinforce what you like. So you don't ever have to get outside of your comfort zone. And I think that a lot of these people, I'm like, is there not a better choice to review this movie for your company? Because most of these places have more than one film reviewer, right? Have somebody else that's more in line to see that, or have more than one person review it for a company like that. Here's what 3 people thought of it at our place. Like, right? Make your own opinion.
It's crazy when you have a reputable, like, website, like I mean, we can debate what's reputable when it comes to websites, but, like, you know, if you've got something like an IGN or something like that, and you've got a reviewer that one of the first things they say is, I don't like Ghostbusters, or I've never watched Ghostbusters, or why are you the one reviewing this? You know, like, I get the fact that you are appealing to the general audience that visits your website. Okay, I understand that, but you're likely not the best one for this task. You know, is there anybody else there? Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of these places should have 3 different movie reviewers, right? Like, okay, you're the type that's the Oscar fan, right? So you only want to see stuff that's going to win awards. There's a whole genre of movies that are dedicated to winning awards, and that's a very specific style of filmmaking. There's children's movies too, right? So,
right.
Okay, then have someone review that, but have someone kind of be the expert in these genre films and be able to critique them accordingly, not to just whatever. It just seems like there is like this weird sense of hate that just kind of came out with these reviews. And I'm like, did I watch the same movie that they did? It just seemed like people just were in an alternate reality. And I'm not saying that, I'm a diehard Ghostbusters fan. So yeah, there's things I noticed that I didn't love in the movie, but at the same time, it gave me everything I wanted to see in a Ghostbusters movie. I got ghosts, I got car scenes, I got everything, right? And the story was fun and it felt like a long episode of the real Ghostbusters.
Yeah, I
loved
think
it.
too. I think too, like there's this sort of need for critics to hold any Ghostbusters movie up, I think, against the first one. Like going back to Ghostbusters 2, you can look at reviews of that movie and people would go, oh, well, I mean, it's not as good as the first one. And it's like, yeah, the first one is lightning in a bottle, right? Like you're going to capture sparks in a jar and be happy, right? Because like capturing lightning in a bottle twice is not a thing you're necessarily going to do. I mean, and even like, look, Jason Reitman made a comment like this, and I don't want to say this was his exact quote because it wasn't. This is me paraphrasing him. But I read this in social media over the last week where he was like, the first Ghostbusters is a perfect movie, right? Like, and like the opportunity to make another perfect movie is not necessarily going to be there, but we did a good job. Like, and that like the movie that's out there, he's really proud of Gil Kennan for making, et cetera. And it's like, yeah, like, the vast majority of sequels are not supposed to be, if they're not supposed to be, they at least are not the same thing as the movie that came before them. And to me, what's odd about that is I think that like every Ghostbusters movie that comes out has to be held up alongside the first one to go, is it as good as it? In the same sense that every Jurassic Park movie does, right? Like, and you whether you like, Chris Pratt with velociraptors riding a motorcycle or not is up to you, right? But like there's some people who really love that movie and think it's a lot of fun, and who think that like the movies that have come in the Jurassic World franchise and the things that are coming out now are really cool and interesting. And yeah, they're not Jurassic Park, right? Like you're never going to make Jurassic Park again. That's not a thing you're ever going to make again, because that was a moment in time and you capture these performances in a bubble. And you captured these, particular effects artists who were working on things, and they made an amazing thing that was revolutionary in the moment, and that kind of changed so much about visual effects. But if you expect that every single Jurassic Park movie then has to do the same thing, like, yeah, you're going to be let down. That's how things work, Well, and so I don't know. Like, I think that that's part of what frustrates me about watching critics review a Ghostbusters movie, is that their thing to hold it up against is the first one. And you're like, okay, cool, but like you're holding it up against something from 40 years ago that we all agree is sort of like, an ideal, if that makes sense, right? Like an archetype of like what the best of something could be,
Yeah, that's like it's a once in a generation film, right? All the things that it captures. And it's something that on paper should not work at all. When you say, oh, we're going to combine comedy with science fiction with ghosts, which contradict a lot of science. So it's like, what is this? Like when you look at it on paper, you're like, this is a terrible idea. But when it's created and it comes to fruition and like they ground it in reality, like it's something spectacular.
Right.
And I think that's another thing I saw in some of the comments here recently was people complaining about, well, this one didn't feel like it had the same heart as Afterlife. And I'm like, did you see the other films? Because Afterlife had a very, very difficult job to do. It had to take us from the past to the present and to deal with a loss not only on screen, but off the screen in ways that for a lot of us that are getting into our 40s or right around that age group, right, we're starting to kind of assess our life choices there. So it's got a lot of emotional heart to it that I think a lot of us can relate to it or experience. But I think Frozen Empire had a ton of that. We just didn't think about it because, like when Phoebe calls Gary dad at the end of the movie, that's like almost an afterthought because it's so late in the film, but like it really just kind of sews that story thread in there. And like, to me, that's the Jason Reitman story that he kind of helped write through the through line, right? It's carried on. It's not as present, but it's still very important to these characters. And we saw so much character growth in this one, right? And I've seen the arguments made before with Ghostbusters 84. There's no character development. No one is better off at the end than when they were at the beginning, right? Egon doesn't really change. They're all who they are. Right. They're all very intelligent people. So that's another part of that movie that doesn't make any sense, but works. And so now we've got Ghostbusters movies where we have true character development, something we didn't have before.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's kind of a detriment for this film coming right after Afterlife, because I think a lot of people, not the hardcore fans, like, oh, new Ghostbuster movie's coming out, so I'm going to go watch Afterlife. And then coming into this right after watching Afterlife, it is so different and fast paced and more loose and more fun and funny and not quite as emotional, at least on the surface. There's just the emotion that it has is spread over so many different characters that it's not as focused as it is and obvious as it is in Afterlife. So I think it's what a lot of people are like coming off Afterlife really fresh and going into this, and it's kind of jumping around from this place to this place to this character to this to this to this, and it's very different comparatively. So I think that's what a lot of the reviewers and not quite hardcore fans like us are having a little bit of leaving a little bad taste in their mouth on the first viewing, I think.
Well, we're so trained by the MCU that everything's got to lead perfectly into the next thing. And so like a tonal change that's that drastic was really confusing for a lot of people. That, to your point, Tony, I think we could have had some animated series or something here just as almost a palate cleanser to kind of like take that emotional weight off our shoulders before we went into the next movie. But
like this feels like if this movie, not so much the exact same story with as far as like the Spangler family and the family drama and stuff in it, but like as far as like the Garaka and the Possessor Ghost and the action and the stuff that happens in it, if this was a direct sequel to Ghostbusters 2, like if this happened in like 1992 or 1993, I think it would be, everybody would love it. Like it'd be crazy. But having that big gap and then being kind of like ushered into Afterlife and having all that emotion and feeling new feelings that you've never felt for Ghostbusters before, and then to jump back into like the fun and the action and the comedy and stuff, like at least more focused on that, it feels like with Frozen Empire, is kind of, it's a little off-putting, and that's why it requires that second viewing. It's like the first viewing of it is your palate cleanser, and then you know what to expect and you can go in and just enjoy it and know what to expect. But that's how I feel, at least.
Yeah, I feel like if I was going to watch all these, there's a lot of film series like Star Wars particularly, right? I can watch the original trilogy, I can watch the prequel trilogy, the sequel trilogy, right? Whatever that looks like. But I don't feel like with Frozen Empire, I'd want to go right in from Afterlife. I'd have a kind of a palate cleanser before I'd watch that in a movie marathon. I might throw on an episode or two of the real Ghostbusters just to kind of set that tonal change, like as kind of a little layover there. I'm a nerd, so I've had Ghostbusters parties before where we've, watched the first two. But in between those, we'd throw on some real Ghostbusters episodes because that actually helps you really carry you into Ghostbusters 2 as well, because the tonal changes that were different there. So I think it's good to have that self-awareness to like seek those things to kind of make it more enjoyable, because the second viewing, I hadn't really watched anything else. I just kind of went in like knowing what to expect in the movie. So I didn't have the anxiety or the fear of missing anything in the movie because I wasn't paying close enough attention. This time I was like, okay, I know how this story is going to play out. Just take it in. And it's fun. It's fun that way. There's no fear of missing anything. There's no like, oh, did I miss something that was in a trailer or on a promotional ad or on a still photograph that was released over the last 6 months marketing this? And I think that's the other piece. We've talked about it a little bit, but just not knowing when to separate the reality from trailers and advertising to like what the final product is. And, obviously when you're editing a movie, things can be difficult sometimes. Things may not work the way you want them to. You may have to make changes, right? You're releasing a movie internationally, assuming one cut. So like if you look at the Chinese market, they have very strict rules about what they allow on film. And so some of that in an editing process caters to that because that's a large market.
Jim, you kind of mentioned earlier about like a baseline when it comes to critics, when it comes to fans, looking at the original film. I think that's kind of the beauty for fans, is that the most of us, we didn't really discover Ghostbusters in that original 84 film. Like a lot of us, we found it with the real Ghostbusters. We found it with Ghostbusters 2. So we're kind of coming at it at a different angle. And I kind of feel like jumping from Afterlife into Frozen Empire, it's almost as if like, what would it have been like going from Ghostbusters to Ghostbusters 2 if the internet was around, in that stage? Because like, I did not know people didn't like Ghostbusters 2 until like the early 2000s. Like when I was like online, late 90s, early 2000s, like I was going to like, the GB fans, different message boards, stuff like that. But I really didn't know that there was a good population that were like, nah, Ghostbusters 2, nah, because for me, that's my favorite Ghostbusters. And the first movie is a better made film. I totally admit that. I'll say that. It's paced better, all this, shot better, whatever you want to say. But to me, Ghostbusters 2, if there's a movie I'm going to put on just for fun, if there's a movie I'm going to put, really, if there's a Ghostbuster movie I'm going to put on, it's going to be the second one. And I got to say, when it comes to Frozen Empire, I mean, this could be a little sacrilegious to some. It is my second favorite. If there is a Ghostbusters movie, at least second viewing, I would go Ghostbusters 2 first and then Frozen Empire, just because to me, they're just damn fun. And when it comes to me being at home watching a movie, 9 times out of 10, that's what I want.
Yeah, I said this when we were talking about this last week, right? That like, I think still for me, like the wittiest and funniest Ghostbusters to me is still going to be the first one. And I am, admittedly a little older than everybody else in this conversation. So I remember the first movie as like my first Ghostbusters experience. And I was like 4, and then I fell in love with the cartoon after it. But like my introduction to Ghostbusters wasn't Ghostbusters 2, right? And so for me, the first one is always going to be the funniest one. But I said last week, even like, I feel like this might be the most fun Ghostbusters movie, like in terms of how the plot unfolds and the narrative unfolds and sort of the action in it. And I agree, like that. I think that this film is going to live well on the small screen. Like to me, this is a movie that in the same way, like you can have Ghostbusters 2 come on in the middle of an afternoon on like, I don't know, like American movie classics, like on the, or something like that, on television, on cable. And you'll sit down and be like, oh, we're in the middle of Ghostbusters 2. I'm going to watch the rest of it. Like this has the same kind of feel to me of being like a movie that is like a comfort movie. There's nothing to me that I don't know how to say this, but like, I don't understand the folks who are frustrated by this movie because I didn't walk out going, this in any way harms anything that I love. Does that make sense? Like even if it's like not your favorite Ghostbusters movie, it's like, it didn't do anything that harms anything that you love. Like it didn't attack any part of the narrative canon that you hold dear. It didn't invert any of it or subvert it or turn around and say like, nope, the rules by which your entire universe operate are completely different. And as a Star Trek fan, like who's had that happen to him before, like who's had things just like suddenly like, nope, things don't work the way they used to before. Like I appreciate that, like it's a movie that still upholds the narrative canon of what I expect in the universe. And does so in a really fun way. And so Jason, like, I don't know that I would put it as like I don't know. I guess I would say that I wouldn't put Ghostbusters 2 as my favorite, but like when I sit there and go, what's my second favorite of these movies now? I mean, this one kind of gets in there in the running, like Afterlife has a lot of important value to me at an emotional level, but it's not the most fun Ghostbusters movie. Like there's funny elements to it and there's funny beats to it. And I'm always going to love Podcast and Phoebe, like forming a friendship as like one of my favorite moments in that entire movie. But like, this movie's more fun. It's the kind of thing you can put on and just like sit back and enjoy and not have to be like, oh, I'm emotionally involved in something really heavy, which is ironic because a lot of like what's going on the screen is really heavy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get the same vibe myself because to me, the rewatchability of this movie is very, very high. Like I threw on Afterlife a lot just because it was newer Ghostbusters. It was in the traditional lore, right? And I watch them all plenty. But there's a rewatchability to this that Afterlife just doesn't have because I have to be in an emotional like state of mind to watch Afterlife because of the heaviness of this. Like this, I know I could throw on. Yeah, there's heart in this movie, but I'm not like, oh, I've got to be so invested in like dealing with the loss, dealing with the existentialism of losing loss, of dealing with this and having these things go on in life. Just the life experiences that Afterlife captures so perfectly of the human struggle that this movie doesn't need any of that. This movie is just able to be a fun movie, start to end. Like starting with an Ecto-1 chase scene, like even the firehouse, like the 1904 scene, like where they come flying out of that, like with the music on there. Like that was my favorite piece of music from the new film score, is that reimagining of that theme at the very beginning when they're coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Like I thought that was great.
Do you know what I thought was really cool that broke from Ghostbusters like visual language in a way and was instead kind of cartoonish was the sort of middle of the movie Patton Oswalt narrated animated sequence of the stone characters that are all kind of like acting out the stuff that he's talking about in low resolution stone art. Like, it was so fun to me. And it was like, oh, you basically made an animated sequence in the middle of this movie that explains all the expository backstory in a way that almost like, you know, dino DNA happens in Jurassic Park, you know?
Yeah, it almost like throws you back to like grade school, like where they had the little film projector and like you're hearing a slide and you press the button and then it's changed a little bit or whatever, you know? And
right.
You've got that vibe in there because they could have easily done a flashback scene there where they show Garaka terrorizing people, right? They had the VFX created, but they told it in a way that was fun and also kind of fresh, and like it allowed it to build on the lore piece, right? Because, you know, lore is so much of what carries the Ghostbusters movies, regardless of whether it's Evo Shind or Vigo or Garaka. Like that just adds to it. It makes it interesting, and it predates Gozer even, you know? So I thought that was fun too.
That also saves Garaka for the end, right? Like, I mean, that kind of just, that heightens that debut even more. So even though we've already seen him in the trailer countless times and such, it just packs more of an oomph when he actually hits on the big screen.
Yeah, I agree.
And the size of Garaka too, I was really impressed with, because like we're not dealing with something that's traditional scale and size of what we're used to. Like to have a giant creature like that, it felt like, oh, okay, the threat is feeling very big, and it's unsettling, right? Obviously, I'm past the point of getting scared in movies, but like I could see like how a younger viewer would be like have some moments of dread and like experience that and be like, wow, that's terrifying. And then to see your heroes defeat it is awesome.
Yeah, I want to go back for a second about that sort of animated piece that exists in the middle there, because I think that like it takes all of this scary dread stuff, right? Like they're having a conversation about how this is a big bad that can potentially kill everything, right? Like worse than anything they've ever faced. And it's done in a way that like has Patton Oswalt being like fun and goofy while they give us an animated sequence. And that's what I mean by like the movie is fun. Like it doesn't get like, think about how that would have been explained in a previous Ghostbusters movie. That is a conversation that happens like between two dudes driving down, a roadway. What about the dead rising from the grave? Like kind of thing that's kind of weird and creepy. Or it's happening inside of a prison cell with, kind of some witty stuff around it. But like this was literally almost like, to me, kind of like the Schoolhouse Rock exposition of, the Ghostbusters plot in front of us. And I think it added to this like kind of sense that it's a fun romp. It's almost it's not a cartoon. It's not like the analogy I don't want to use here, like because I think it's not a good one, is like Batman and Robin is a terrible version of an attempt to take, like a cartoon version of something and make it into an animated or make it into a live action film. And this movie is not that at all. But like the way in which it kind of plays with the tropes and the visual language of animation and cartoons and things, like, I mean, I just think it makes a lot of sense. I think it really fits together well.
It's a great balance. I mean, like right after that scene, you have the possessed garbage bag, right? Like you just have this doom and gloom. And then all of a sudden, they're trying to hunt down a possessed garbage bag. You have Ray running into the library lady, nice callback there. It takes itself seriously, but at the same time, it just turns itself on its head at the drop of the dime. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. And like, even in that sequence, right? It's like, how does Phoebe stop the lion? Well, she does a very cartoony thing of she cuts its tail off, right? And it's like all of those pieces are not like the stakes are high, but the way in which our adventure unfolds takes these sort of lighter, fun moments that, even though like we're going to deal with some very heavy stuff, like potentially a teenager who decides to like experiment with ending her own life temporarily, like kind of a really dark subject matter when you get down to it. Like there's a lot of heart and fun in this that I just, we'll kind of move on from this in a second, because I feel like we're almost kind of overly justifying at this point, like why people are wrong in internet forums that I don't care about. I'll be honest with you. Like it's kind of funny to consider this, but like I haven't seen a lot of that blowback because I just stay out of most of the forums where people are toxic and negative at this point. And I've learned where to be on the internet with this fandom and where not to be, and which Facebook groups to be in and which ones to just go, there's nothing really here for me, but like, yeah.
Before we like move on from it though, the library scene kind of has some of my biggest negatives like dislikes. I'm fine with the whole Garaka animation and explanation and all that stuff. And I like Patton in the movie, but the whole time he's talking, I'm just thinking I got Ray Stantz right there. Like I would rather hear Ray give me this exposition. Like did they even need to go to the library? I mean, he's got Ray's occult books. He should have known did he need to call a guy to figure this out? It just feels like something that it could have been. I mean, I get why they went back to the library was just to kind of
to
for
make sure
nostalgia
that Ghostbusters
purposes.
the video game is canon. That's why. Because
And-
they have to
and
go
to
to
show
the
the
old library under the library, Tony. That's
Yeah,
why.
that's-
No, I'm
this
kidding.
is true.
Sorry.
This is true though. This is a whole nother podcast episode with just going into the library within the library. But
I'm
I get
so
why they
terrible
go
for
back.
interrupting you. I'm sorry.
But it just feels like I don't know. I would have rather had in this whole big enormous cast, like adding Patton into it, like kind of felt like everything he's doing Dan Aykroyd could have done, which Dan Aykroyd in this movie does not feel like Ray Stantz. He feels like Dan Aykroyd, and it's amazing. It just feels like Dan's just being Dan, and he's didn't even have a script. He's just talking, and I loved every second of Dan Aykroyd on the screen. And that's another thing. Like they added another character with Patton Oswalt, and it just felt like it wasn't really necessary. Like this is something they could have settled with Dan figuring out the lore and stuff. And maybe they did have to go back to the library to find the wax cylinder or something, and you can have Patton with all that. But it just felt like this should be a Ray Stantz speech or bust out Tobin Spirit Guide type of moment in it. And
I think that called pretty heavily on the iconography of the library and it being such a place in the fandom. You know, you mentioned the video game, obviously the diehards love that as well. The interesting piece to that though was my biggest and it may be a hot take, it may not be, but I didn't need to see the library ghost in her terror form. Just having her having him pass by and having her shushing him would have been enough. Like, I think that would have been great. It almost would have been better than having the scare moment, because the scare moment you could have thrown in the credits just to get us, when you're not expecting, make it a jump scare that I'm not expecting.
it just feels like a cameo with her. Like it's amazing to see her. The special effects look amazing. It looks like they have some original 84 footage of her in normal human form that they reused for this. And it just feels like a quick cameo. And it's what we saw in the trailers for the most part, kind of with a lot of things in this movie. There's some really cool stuff, but it just left me wanting a little bit more. So I felt like they could have had maybe a little bit more library ghosts happening, while they're running through all the aisles of books, maybe some books start stacking up in front of them and they have to go around them, and books are passing from shelf to shelf, or the card catalogs throwing stuff at them too. Just to see her for that little second, even though one of my favorite parts is just Dan Aykroyd's reaction to it. It's the best piece of acting he's done in decades. Is just right there in that moment.
Yeah.
But it just left me wanting just a little bit more. They could have just done a little bit more with it. It's just a little cameo. It was great to see her. I'm not going to complain. It's just a lot of things in this movie was great, and it just left me wanting more, which is kind of the way with the original movies too. I wish there was more Vigo scenes and Ghostbusters 2, and I wish there was more with the Terror Dogs.
That's
in the
what
first
a movie
movie
should do, right?
Yeah, at least it left me wanting more.
Yeah,
I'm going to take one point of disagreement here, which is that I
dare
really like Patton Oswalt's involvement.
I liked
in
him
this
too.
movie. I actually like that there is a sort of sense of expanding out the expertise and the drawing of knowledge in ghostbusting to other fields. And if you think about that scene with the research lab, they talk about how they have a parabotanist and a paramusicologist, right? They have these various different paranormal researchers who dabble in different contexts of human interaction and communication in life, that I think is so fascinating as an idea that I just want to spend an entire episode just unpacking all the different para whatevers that you could have as specialists, like a paramechanic whose job it is to fix every haunted car out there. But
they're gonna need one now.
They're gonna need one now. We've seen it. But I think that it's kind of fun that there's this idea that the Ghostbusters know a lot about how to catch ghosts, but they don't necessarily know everything else about the world, right? And that they may have to, in terms of maybe Ray does know a lot about different paranormal things, and he knows what the death chill is, but he's not a linguistics expert, especially not one in dead languages. right? And so it like leaves the ground open for us to get these new characters who can be experts that inform the ghostbusting world. And it means like maybe Patton Oswalt gets to be a recurring character in this universe. Like you know, maybe Ray Stantz is not going to be around forever, right? Like I don't want to be dark and like, you know, cold, but like, you know, we've talked about this on this podcast, like Ernie Hudson's in his 80s, right? Like, so like they're not going to make these movies forever, which means we need some characters who we can get to know, who can be like part of the grounding of New York City, who can kind of be the weird like callback characters who necessarily are not the Ghostbusters, but who create the universe in which they live, right? Like it's why people care about the fact that Walter Peck is back, because he's a character who like creates the universe. Like I've said this to William Atherton when I met him at FanFest, that he's the glue that holds the 80s and 90s together for me, because like without him, there is not like a Die Hard universe. There's just like a one-off Die Hard movie, right? Like without him, there's not like a character who comes back and recurs in a series of video games and other things that creates a Ghostbusters universe in which this character Walter Peck exists, you know? And so like the idea that Dr. Hubert Wartsky exists as a canon character out there who maybe the Ghostbusters consult with on more than one occasion is kind of a cool idea to me. Like maybe we get to see him again in the cartoon, and that's kind of neat, you know?
Yeah, I think Patton did great in the film, and also I love the idea of Dan, or Ray, I should say, having friends that's outside of the Ghostbusters. You know, like that just adds another element. Like, do these guys go to the blues bar together? You know, do they sit back and have like a nice bottle of Crystal Head? Just the concept that he hangs out with people other than Winston Zeddemore is kind of a revelation to me when it comes to the character.
Yeah, as opposed to just be like, give my regards to the coven, right? Like,
yeah, he's got the friends out there. And I think, you know, to your point, you're expanding the universe, right? Because if this goes towards a TV series in any way, shape, or form, which you easily could go that route if you wanted to, you could do more films, but you have these other characters that are adjacent, right? He can kind of be the fill-in for Ray if anything happens to Dan. You know, I mean, Father Time is inevitable. So, you know, you've got other options out there. But to your point, the original Ghostbusters referenced Tobin's Spirit Guide, Spate's catalog. So the fact that these might be people that, you know, who's to say that we don't find out Hubert worked for one of those, you know, Spate's catalog, right? Sounds like something that could be a possible thing. So there's ways to expand that knowledge, because when you think about it, Trevor doesn't know anything. You know, Trevor's along for the ride. He's guilty by association.
Right.
Same thing with Callie, because, you know, she's mom, so she's got that, but she's also had that strained relationship with dad, so she doesn't have it. Phoebe knows everything, but she doesn't know everything.
Right.
You know?
Well, she knows how to catch ghosts, right? And that's sort of the point, is like she understands the physics of Grandpa's designs, and she understands the mechanics of how the ghost busting technology works. But even once things start going wrong with the containment unit, they're like turning to like, this is what I got to say I love about Phoebe Spangler in this movie. As a kid who was like the 15-year-old in 1995 when Windows 95 hit, and whose parents would come upstairs and be like, do you understand why the computer doesn't work? Like, I feel like that she's in a lot of the same position of being like, do you understand why the containment unit is blowing up? No. I'm like 15. Yeah. Like, shouldn't you know more about this, adults? You know, and it's kind of like this funny thing where she is, but that's her like knowledge base, right? Like where her skill set exists is not an understanding the folklore of where ghosts come from. It's not an understanding about what's going on in, you know, temples and carvings and that stuff of like the lore of Gozer, even in Afterlife. It's her ability to sort of like look at a cyclotron and kind of get led by a ghost to replace, you know, some capacitors and some other things that aren't working correctly and work out Grandpa's designs, right? And it's kind of like that thing to consider, that you need a longer term characters who are going to be able to fill in the gaps on folklore. And like, look, I'll be real. Like, I hope the next Ghostbusters movie we see goes international. It's been talked about a number of times. Like the directors of this movie have talked about it in different capacities, like at different points. Like we've seen it when Paul Feig was helming things. I know I just said his name. Those of you listening out there who immediately grab your pitchforks, like put them down. It's okay. But like, there's this notion that ghostbusting could become an international thing and it could lean into a lot of different folklore out there. And if it were to, like, we'd need more experts outside of what our Ghostbusters know, you know? So it's like, I get it. Like I want some more sort of like Ray to have more knowledge of those things too, Tony. Right. But like, I also think that like having Patton there complements Ray, right? Like he's an old dude who knows a lot about ghosts, knows a lot about ghost busting, but like Does he know everything about folklore? Right? Does he know everything about dead languages and linguistics? I don't know. You know?
Yeah, to me, that's the same reason I loved Lars's character, because, yeah, he's as book smart as Egon is, but he's also got this rough edge to him where, you know, he's kind of like, he knows he's better than other people and he's not afraid to kind of share that, right? So it's that Egon character, but in a fresh way that's not being repeated, because obviously, you know, we get Phoebe to kind of carry on a lot of that Spengler tradition, but we get Lars to kind of come in and be the guy that's like, hey, I know this. You're in the way. Get out of here. Go away.
Yeah.
You know, and he wants to be on a level with his peers, which is kind of why he's looking at Gary like, all right, Gary, you know, because Gary's an educated man, but he's also a fanboy, right? So like, and I think we all can relate to that, because I think a lot of us would feel like Gary if we were really in the universe. You know, you'd be like, oh, I love this. I know a lot. But
that's another thing, though. He's a what is he, a seismologist, like earthquake guy?
Yes.
Like, shouldn't he have, like, it seemed like they just made him really kind of dumb in this. Like, there's kind of an earthquake and a thing that happens to the containment unit. It's kind of happening. Like, he should have had some, like, oh, this is a seismic whatever, but I don't understand why. Like, he's just like, what's happening? Like, he should have had like something, at least something to say, being a seismologist.
Yeah, I will say that.
But I did love Paul Rudd in the movie.
I loved him too, but I think you're kind of right that he kind of adopts a dad role.
Yeah, he kind of
like a sitcom TV dad role where it's like, rather than getting into the science of things, he's like, how can I make my kind of stepdaughter feel better? Well, I'll unplug this thing from the proton pack and then be like, Phoebes, I can't get this to work.
Oh man,
can you help? Yeah, you know what it's like. And then he has this like unrequited conversation with the door. You know, he doesn't realize he's having an unrequited conversation with the door. And so it's like, I kind of agree with you. Like, I would have liked to have seen Gary get more into like, it's kind of weird to consider, but it's like, we've gone from Mr. Gruberson to Gary. Like, we've got this full transition from like Mr. Gruberson science teacher to Gary, the boyfriend and stepdad of the Spengler family. But like,
step teacher.
Yes. It's a great line, right? Like, I'm her step teacher. It's just a fantastic line.
Alec couldn't be here tonight, but he wanted to call out the big Easter egg that he saw. So outside of the library scene, and I don't know if you've noticed this one or not, but on your next viewing, check it out. Apparently it's a flyer for a Dana Barrett cello concert.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yep. Yes.
I missed that.
Something JD pointed out to me. JD Raymer, shout out to our friend of the podcast, told me the same thing. Right.
Yeah.
So
Alec told me that, like, he's like, basically implied that I didn't watch the movie. I'm like, all right, calm down. I'm only on my second viewing here. Because I was looking for it after JD made that post, and I was like, okay, so I've seen a cello downstairs or in the research lab, but I also saw an acoustic guitar and a violin. So I'm like, is that the nod, the musical connection? And it was way deeper than that. So I thought that was fun.
Well, that's a good point you raised about the Easter eggs, Justin. Let me try and put some structure back on this, because I feel like we've been talking for an hour and we've just been kind of like, let's ping pong off of all of our various reactions, which is fine with me, because like we're all excited about it. But what's something that you were excited to see in the movie that, like, at a Ghostbusters fandom level, whether it was an intentional Easter egg or just a thing that like you reacted to and you were like, oh my God, that's a thing. Like, what were some of the things that you saw in the movie that made you excited just because they confirmed something about the Ghostbusters universe for you?
I'll jump in. I can immediately think the whole attic scene with Slimer, because you can even see like the way they crop the windows there to kind of be that attic space in there. And I was like, that was great, because, you know, we don't really see a lot of that. And then all the merchandise that was kind of just stowed up there. But the one piece that I really liked up there was the Marty's Ghostbuster sign. Marty's sign that he made was standing vertical up there, right? And I
missed that.
Oh, yeah, no, it's in the background. It's like standing up in a vertical position, tacked against the wall, like somebody has just carried it up there and then shoved it up there and forgotten about it for 40 years. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you easily overlook that when you're looking for the Ghostbusters 2 thermal mugs and all the promotional boxes that are up there. But don't look for that. Just look around that room, because there's tons of stuff stashed upstairs that was really cool. And I love seeing Marty's sign up there. I was like, I like that they still had it.
Yeah, I agree. That was one of my favorite things, was like in the attic space and I didn't catch it on the first couple of viewings. I think I saw it on the third time around. And I was like, oh my God, there it is. It's like literally they made a copy of the Ghostbusters sign from the first movie and just like shoved it in the back, which, I mean, we're used to seeing the Ghostbusters 2 sign shoved places like in the video games and stuff, like, you know, tucked away in a basement or something. So to see the original, like handwritten Ghostbusters sign was almost cooler, I thought.
Seeing Ray Parker Jr. and the music video and the Kenner toys and all that stuff like made like officially canon during that newsreel, and the Statue of Liberty, the Ghostbuster 2 love, which it makes sense too with this being the sequel to Afterlife to have this one show a lot more love to the sequel to the original. But yeah, seeing the Kenner commercials and Ray Parker Jr. dancing down the street with Bill Murray and them canonically explaining it as the Ghostbuster craze of the 80s and all that that was the most shocking, and I don't know, that one got me and I was really excited to see that.
I agree with you. Like, it's so funny to me that Ghostbusters fandom was made canon by a Ghostbusters movie. And so Jason, I'm going to throw this to you because I want to see how you feel about it. Are you hopeful that by the time we get to Ghostbusters 12, Ghostbusters news will be amongst the montage of stuff that illustrates what's canon in the fandom?
I mean, I am totally the next film, if they need some guy in the background just kind of walking the street scratching his beard, I can be that guy. Or just reporting on the news, I can be that fella. But no, for me, I'm gonna also say Slimer, of course. I mean, it's cliche for me, but that was huge. I will say it. I know I said it last week. I'll say it again here. The shot of him eating Cheetos floating in the air is the single best shot, the single best frame Slimer has ever looked. That was freaking amazing. Also, I love the fact that when the containment unit is going to hell, you can see the added portion, like behind the brick wall. And it's much larger than we kind of thought, which makes me kind of think, I mean, obviously they have another containment unit at the R&D facility,
right?
But in the next movie, they're going to need a new containment unit of sorts. Could we see something larger? Could we see something real Ghostbusters-esque kind of be set up there? Because obviously, again, they're showing the back end of this, and the containment unit is much larger than we thought. It's just not, a rectangle on the wall or anything like that.
No, that's just an aperture, right? It's just a way into it. Yeah.
Exactly.
I want to still see if they had delved inside and zoomed in really close, if there were a bunch of floating rocks inside of it. Because it's like a real Ghostbusters movie. And so that's my one regret is that we didn't get to see inside the containment unit and nobody went inside in a suit and that there weren't like ghosts floating around on rocks hanging out and shit.
Can I say, I have had some people comment on my YouTubes and the social medias and everything saying that they felt misled from the marketing and the trailers, stuff like that. When it comes to some of the scenes that were shown that didn't make it. To me, the only thing that I feel slightly misled on is the marketing, the respects where they were like, every ghost they've ever caught is coming back. And you have this moment where the containment unit, it bursts open. And what do you see coming out? You see just these white, pale, fabric sheet looking style ghosts. You don't see the Scoleri brothers. You don't see, a nod to the real Ghostbusters. You don't see the Grundle or Samhain or the Boogeyman. And I feel like, kind of like how Afterlife had the Bug-Eye ghost, you could have really packed this scene full of I shouldn't say packed. I think you shouldn't overload, but a couple of little things here and there. The Scaleries causing chaos.
Taxi driver ghost, like coming back and being in a cab.
Granny Gross. Just something like that. I feel like could have really kind of heightened that scene just a little more rather than just, again, these kind of like almost like white sheeted ghosts that are just kind of flying through the air.
Yeah, no, I can hear that. That makes some sense, right? But like, I think that you're right. Like that would have been something to add to sort of the lore of Ghostbusters, in a way that's would kind of give us more of the opportunity to celebrate some of those animated characters in a movie that was kind of, I don't know, predicated in some way on the vibe of the animated series. So, but, yeah.
And
I get that.
I assume that was just kind of budget related, right? When we talk about 100 million total on this is what they're kind of estimating or kind of telling us. To do that additional animation to kind of make those more unique, I don't know what that would have really say, but to your point, I would have loved to have seen the Scoleri brothers in there. Now, did you guys all catch Slimer follow the sewer dragon out at the last scene?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't catch that the first time. I just saw the sewer dragon, but I did notice that the other time. I was like, okay, so he's there. And then I guess my only other thing is, can a ghost eat a ghost? Because when Gary goes to try to sacrifice his life, which is like a crazy thing in the movie that, I feel like it's just kind of been like pushed to the side. Like he's willing to sacrifice it all to save Trevor. And then all of a sudden, like Slimer eats the pizza that's possessed. and then all of a sudden Possessor's not a problem anymore.
Best scene in the movie. Best scene in the movie. Just
like Slimer took care of that. So that's the Possessor ghost, right? So, but I really enjoy the Possessor ghost as a fun ghost in there, right?
Yes.
You know, we've seen that, and like just to see this recurring theme of a ghost that we don't actually have to look at, but just does silly stuff. That's great.
It feels like the Possessor ghost could have almost been its own movie. Like they could have gone crazy with that. The possibilities are endless. So like to have it in there, it almost felt like kind of a distraction to me, having the Possessor. I loved it, but it just, again, left me wanting more. Like this is in there, but I would like to see more of this, but there's not enough of this. And it was like something that felt like kind of makes the whole movie feel like it is more of like an episodic TV series that was kind of crammed into a movie. Like the Possessor Ghost was an episode, and the whole Melody thing is an episode, and Garaka is an episode, and the library can be an episode, and it just feels like a bunch of that crammed into one. I enjoyed it though. I had a lot of fun with it. It doesn't feel like quite as epic, and like every ghost they ever battled like was advertised and stuff, and like what the fans kind of grasp onto in the marketing really isn't represented that much in the film, as far as like the jackets and certain scenes and the Ecto Z and stuff like that. Like all this stuff like us fans kind of grasp onto before the movie was released. Doesn't really show up in the movie that much or at all in some cases, like the repossessed stuff, but
which is funny, right? Like the repossessed shirt, like it's on a Funko Pop. Like, hey, this is branding. It's part of the movie. We never see the logo for repossessed in the movie at all. Like, not even once. We hear the word once, like, this is repossessed, as like Ray is doing the intro to the show. And like, other than that, you'd have no idea that was a thing in this movie whatsoever. It's kind of funny. But I gotta be honest, I just don't care. Like, I admit it. Like, I just don't care about the time I watched it the second time, because I'm like, the movie's so much fun. And like, look, I'll also say this at the Possessor Ghost. Like, I think I said this, Jason, when you and I were talking about this last week, but like, as a person who's played way too much Spirits Unleashed, like, that's how the ghosts work in that game. Like, as long as you can get something in range to you, you can possess it and walk around in it. The idea that you could be a trash bag that runs away from Ghostbusters is literally a thing you can do in Spirits Unleashed. Like, and so I really enjoyed the Possessor because it was something where like I got to see something I've been doing in a dumb video game for the last 18 months. You know, like, oh, jump into each object, try and get away from the Ghostbusters by jumping into a floor cleaner or jumping into, you know, a trash can or a trash bag, or whether it's, you know, a pile of buckets that you can jump into and then one of them hops away. And so it was like so fun to watch that in a cinematic sense, because it's something that I feel got set up so well by the video game. Like, I really wish that there was like, if you've never played Spirits Unleashed and you're out there listening, like, this is a reason to go play this game. It's to sort of experience the physics of what the Possessor does, because it's like quite literally how it works in the game and how it works in the movie. I thought it was really cool.
It's kind of a cool, like, full circle moment in the respects that, yeah, like you were saying, I mean, that's exactly how the ghost plays. And now, obviously, this week we have Frozen Empire DLC coming to Spirits Unleashed.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a weird vibe in that sense, and we don't really know, you know, has everything been revealed yet? Are we getting any more content, any other new ghost types, what have you? But yeah, me personally, like when it came to the Possessor, I do kind of agree that I wish there was a little bit more, like maybe I get him being eaten by Slimer. Okay. Actually, one thing with Slimer, the fact that you noted that he leaves at the end with the Hell's Kitchen sewer dragon. They both kind of fly out of the firehouse together. It just kind of makes me sit and wonder what was confining Slimer to the firehouse all this time. You know, like just one day he's like, all right, this is my friend now. We're going to go on an adventure. Me and this sewer dragon, we're going to do it. Or maybe there's like an indigestion, like a, you know, like maybe something kind of rumbling in his tummy after eating the Possessor ghost. I don't know. Maybe he's possessed. Who knows?
They ran out of Cheetos at the firehouse.
But I think some of that's also set up for, you know, every ghost we ever caught, we see the containment unit basically get emptied again. And that's why they're able to trap Garak in it, because, you know, they have the line that basically says, you know, the giant ghost trap's empty right now. You're like, oh, okay, that's fair. But that leaves it open for whatever version of media they go with next, right? Because there could be, if they want to go with episodic television, they could easily do a Scoleri Brothers episode. Like, imagine how fun some of that stuff could be. I do think this movie could use a 15 to 20 minute like extended edition just to kind of fill in a few more of those gaps. It was just some of this fun stuff, you know, and we'll see. on the home video release, what they kind of throw in there for us to watch and kind of get a better grasp of. But usually when they cut something, it's for a reason. So
I was left wondering a big question. Not that I'm looking to rehash a villain a third time, but what does this mean for the 198 spirit ghost traps that were full of pieces of Gozer? Because that had to add a lot of PKE to that very clanky banging around containment unit that had all the old stuff in it, right? Like, and to be clear, like, we should expect that everything they caught before was in the old containment unit, because we get that explanation of like, how long will it take to move everything from the old ECU to the new one? And Lucky says something like, going trap by trap, we estimate over 7 years or something, right? Like, that if they were gonna take like one trap at a time and move each entity all 24/7, just working at it, it would take them 7 years to move everything out of the existing containment unit into the new one. So we should presume that's got to have a lot of Gozer in it, right? Like, so is that all out now? Like, is the coming of Gozer an inevitability once again? And those dates on the calendar that were carved into Egon's wall, like, are still dates on the, like, is this like T2, like Judgment Day? You think you averted it, but actually turns out T3 is going to happen anyway. Like, I'm left with that big question.
Well, is that something that was in the script they didn't film or cut later on, where Winston's saying, hey, we made this to contain Gozer in separate things, because it appears to be multiple containment units,
right,
or entry points in there, right?
Yeah,
so
there's like eight
I feel
or
like
6 different like giant containment grids, though.
I feel like there's a lot of ways they could easily write that, or already did write that, and we just don't get to experience it. Like, even if I don't ever get to see an extended cut, I would love to see that first script or the shooting script, just to kind of understand better, like, what else is going on in the background. Like, I don't care if I have special effects for it, but I would love to know it just as a story completist. But
that's fair. So let's talk about this for a second. One of the things about this movie is that we've talked about the idea that the third act resolves very quickly. And I will say that one of my frustration points, and it's not even frustration, but one of my like kind of like moments, is this idea that freezing things is apparently a very biologically fluid process in the Ghostbusters universe at this point. Like, we watch some people be pretty much like frozen solid for entire moments. They just kind of get thawed out by fire and paranormal energy being reversed, I guess, right? But like, what did you all think? Like, did you feel like there was sort of like a cheat here in the idea that like they kind of undid things too easily in the film? Because like, I admit, like, I like the movie and I think it's a lot of fun and I'm okay with it in the end, and it's very Doctor Who-ish to me that like you could just kind of hand wave the idea that things roll back on a clock and it's okay, and it's very real Ghostbusters. But I also watched a premiere, like a series of like trailers and things that talked about a thing called the death chill, and suggested that people's bronchial tubes were going to be crushed. So kind of like, did you just lower the stakes in the final act or what?
Well, I think there's a few things there. For me, the first one that was noticeable was after Phoebe is back in her body, she's like very cold, right? So we see her wrapped in one of the red parkas in the Ecto-1 driving back and talking to Callie, having that moment. And I'm like, okay, is she cold because the Garaka thing? Is she cold because she was out of body and her spirit was separated? It's just one of those real Ghostbusters things. I think if you overthink it, it's just going to upset you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, though, I think there was the opportunity to say, it's like it's spectral ice. It's very extreme Ghostbusters-esque, right? Because how many times in Extreme Ghostbuster did something crazy happen, and at the end of the episode, Ghost is caught, everything goes back to normal.
Right.
Very, very much showing that. And so that's the vibe I kind of got from this. But then the deaths I wondered about, like, clearly the Fire Master vape shop guy is dead, like, as in permanently dead, because he fell into pieces.
Right.
But like anyone else, did the lion magically come back together because that was Possessor? Did they restore that, rebuild it? Like, how did that all play out?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Tony, what'd you feel about this?
I'm fine with it, just because I went into it being kind of warned by everybody. It's very real Ghostbusters-esque. So I kind of assumed that you've seen all New York frozen, that's going to thaw out and everything's going to be fine at the end. And as far as like the library line goes, I've seen people complain, "Oh, what? It's just fixed. Why is that there?" But that's actually like a really smart like Easter egg and nod to Ghostbusters 2, because at the end of that, they show the Statue of Liberty is just back on her pedestal and on Liberty Island, and nothing's said, and she's just totally fine. That's the first time I saw it. Didn't really register at all, but a lot of things didn't register the first time. But the second time, it really hit home. Oh, that's just like Ghostbusters 2, and it made me laugh. And it's actually kind of one of my favorite scenes that kind of makes people mad. But another thing, though, if you're frozen and you thaw and everybody's fine, what happens like to the Fire Master vape guy? He's in a bunch of pieces now. When he thaws, is there a bunch of meat chunks in his shop now? Like, is that what?
You just reminded me is that apparently in different drafts of Ghostbusters 2, what's supposed to happen is that she's supposed to have switched hands. So like, even though she's back on Ellis Island, she's now holding the book and the torch in alternating hands because she's been on an adventure and then gotten back in position. And when they had her get back in position and then depossessed her, they fucked it up. Right. And so like, it's supposed to be one of the things that like was left over as a result of their adventure is that she permanently is holding the book and the torch in the wrong hand for the rest of eternity, which like would have been a fun thing to do in Ghostbusters 2 as well, right? And it's, if you look carefully at the way the lion is back together, you do see sort of like this fragmentation and almost there's like crunchiness and cracks to the stone. So it is there's sort of sense that like the lion comes back together from its chunk and component parts. So you have to ask yourself, is the same true of the Fire Master? Did his corpse reassemble after the movie was over? Because that's kind of weird and creepy too. But yeah, I mean, like, there's some magic hand waving there, and I admit that I give it a lot of okay because, as I've said earlier, like I'm a Doctor Who fan. Like Doctor Who does this. It just is like, hey, we got 45 minutes of threatening all of time and space, and now we're gonna do 5 minutes of wrap it all up. And if you're willing to do that and have fun with it and you don't nitpick it to death, like it's weird to think about this, but like one of the reasons I've loved Ghostbusters for many years is because it's kind of like Star Trek and that Star Trek over sciences itself. It like wants to have a scientific explanation about physics that explains everything about stuff. And Ghostbusters kind of has the same thing about like, ionization rates and constants and things of how you can hold a ghost in consistent ways. But like part of what drives ghostbusting and like the paranormal is the unexplained. So being able to sort of like blend that scientific logic stuff alongside the you don't have to explain it stuff, I think is good. And like as a Doctor Who fan, I put up with things like the Doctor saying time is not linear. It's timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly, right? And Ghostbusters does more than that for me in terms of explaining this stuff out. So, maybe there's a deleted scene that explains it. It's like all the paranormal particles that were created by Garaka were so cold that they suddenly froze back together at the last moment. I don't know, but I don't really care. I don't know. I think that should be a benchmark of a movie. You watch a movie and you go, yeah, I don't know. That's a nitpick, but I don't care. Like that means like the movie did a good job.
Jim, I care. I think you're full of bullshit there. And let me tell you, I wanted to see people die on that beach.
Me too.
And that was a huge selling point. When I saw that first teaser trailer, I was like, oh man, this is going to be awesome. People are going to die. Like the Ghostbusters aren't going to save these people. Ice is like, maybe some people did get impelled by those ice. Maybe, it shot right through up their, bikini bottoms. I don't know. But the fact that these people who got frozen on the Ferris wheel and everything, they're seemingly just alive after, that was always a huge, even as a child, I was a morbid child. In that one Extreme Ghostbusters episode where like all the eyes come back and goes in like the people's sockets after that ghost, they zap it. I didn't want that. I wanted all those people to be blind for the rest of their lives. I wanted a death count. I wanted people to die in Frozen Empire. And the fact that you pointed that out to me, I gave it an 8.5 beforehand. I'm going down to a 7. Not really. But again, yeah, it was a cop. I feel like it's a bit of a cop out. I understand that you can't have the press event outside of Hook and Ladder, and they're like, hey, they saved the day outside of the, 2,000 people that are dead.
Yeah, everyone that's frozen to death. Like,
to be fair, look, Peck does show up at the end and he does say that there's a disaster all over the city. He's like, there's citywide devastation. Right. So it's like there's stuff that went on. It's not as if everything goes back to normal, but
he's talking about like icicles going through taxi cabs and ruining freaking street corners and stuff like that. That's all he cares about.
Look, all of this are in the
He's
deleted
the mayor.
scenes.
He doesn't care about people's lives.
All of this are in the deleted scenes that apparently Gil Kennan has said he wants audiences to be able to see.
I'd love to see them all. I want to see them all.
Speaking of deleted scenes, one thing, I mean, we're kind of jumping a little bit here, but there was an interview with Gil Kennan regarding the mid-credit, mid-credit scene with the mini puffs, where he kind of hinted that there's like more to that story and there's like a connection point somewhere and they're on the move and something's happening there. Any kind of idea as to how or where or why this is happening?
My first guess was that was Possessor Ghost that got into the truck, and the mini puffs were just kind of along for the ride. But I it's hard to say. But I wasn't looking at a higher level in the movie, looking to, make that straight line to something else.
I didn't get that impression that it was the Possessor Ghost because the mini puffs are all working in unison to try and drive the truck. Like they are like trying to steer the wheel and stuff. So the Possessor could just like hop in the truck and then drive it wherever it wanted to go. But the mini puffs have to do stuff. But like, could there be another, underground temple site that Shandor had or something? And the mini puffs are going to go and very cutely go and create another coming of Gozer now that we know that Gozer might potentially be out of the containment unit. Like that's a thing, right? Like I'm not like, I gotta be honest. I'm not stoked about the potentiality of another Gozer movie. Like I'm good. I think we're good for a while on that as a concept, but like, could the mini puffs be going to some site of, paranormal energy? Could they be drawn to it or something along those lines? Could they be compelled as minions of Gozer, mini marshmallow minions of Gozer to do it? Maybe.
I took it kind of like, what's the title of the second Jurassic World movie?
The Lost World?
No, or Jurassic World. So like the 5th movie.
Fallen Kingdom?
Yeah. Like at the end of that one, they show like the dinosaurs have escaped and they're like in different parts of the world. And they show things like that, kind of explaining that the dinosaurs are all over the place. That's kind of how I took this scene. Like the mini puffs are out of New York and they're going. So paranormal stuff is leaving New York to kind of
set the international thing up. Yeah, that works.
Set it outside of New York. Like, look, paranormal stuff is leaving New York. This is some random truck stop somewhere. Like it's the ghosts are getting out. They're going everywhere. And even podcasts mentioned that they're,
I mean, the fact
waiting.
that it is a big rig, right? I mean, that thing's going across the country.
A lot of marshmallows in there.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like, if the idea is that they can only paranormally, if they're locked in the marshmallow form or something, and so they can only paranormally possess other marshmallow material, and now they have a truckload of it. Right. So it's like podcast is talking about how he thinks they've been mating.
Yeah.
Like what if the reality is that like they can only really create more of themselves if they have the base material. They can only possess marshmallows because they're locked into one destructor form and they're the like, paranormal offset or, secondary influence of a paranormal incident. So it would be kind of interesting if that's the idea is like they just take over a Stay Puft Marshmallow factory and begin churning out copies of themselves. Which then, of course, throw themselves to their doom with glee. Like, let's be real. The best of those mini puffs is the one who has like the cigarette lighter from the inside of a truck is just burning his face off with glee. It's like, this is awful and amazing at the same time.
Did you see the one that's in Raise a Cult that's actually in the jar of blue slime? There's one that's in there. And like when it gets scared, it just like submerges itself inside its further.
Yeah.
That's my favorite one.
Well, we've talked about a lot of the things that, we sort of like about this movie. We've talked about some of the issues that we've heard people be critical about and that some of us are defensive of, and that, some of us are okay with. But I want to sort of ask you overall, like, what is your favorite thing about this movie? Like, if you had to tell somebody one thing that you thought was your favorite thing about this movie, what would it be?
I'm going to say the humor's back. And like, it's in a fresh way, right? There's a lot of funny characters in here and there's lots of little funny lines that just kind of go along with it. But I felt like Afterlife was missing some of the humor, and not necessarily in a bad way, but the story that needed to tell just didn't lend itself to humor throughout the whole time, or scenario-based humor, right? This movie had some scenario-based humor. It had humor, a little bit of every type of humor you could have into a movie. And I think to me, that's what really made me happy watching it, was that it was funny in lots of ways too, when it was also contrasting like the spooky stuff.
Yeah, right on. That's fair. I think you're right. Like there's a lot of, like, as much as I'm saying it's not the funniest Ghostbusters movie, and I think it's fun, like I do think you're right that there's a lot more sort of like beat by beat jokes, and sort of funny interactions and good play between characters that it's not that Afterlife doesn't have it. It's just that Afterlife is a different tone. You know, it's more of a more somber movie where a character who we really love has passed on, you know, and so it sort of like changes the tone of what's going on versus like listening to family banter and bickering, you know, that kind of goes on in the first few moments of this movie. That's really kind of fun.
Well, and Trevor tripping up the stairs, like, did he really trip up the stairs on set? Like, it's that Chevy Chase physical humor that's also kind of back in there. It's
right.
And it's not just jokes, it's situational. It's a variety of humor. And I think that kind of balances things out.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I like that. Jason, you have something?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the humor, but I think for this film, it is such a better jumping in point movie than Afterlife. Afterlife was very much grounded in those original two in the respects of, you know, it was a love letter to the the old school fans. You're saying goodbye to Egon Spengler. To me, this, in terms of trying to build a new audience, trying to get, you know, the youth into it, this is such a better film. I mean, it's fast paced, it's action, it's comedy. And at the same time, too, you've got Paul Rudd, who, you know, the younger people know from Marvel. You've got Finn Wolfhard, Stranger Things. If you're looking to grow your audience, which obviously Ghostbusters, Sony Pictures, they want to, you know, they want to have all these other ventures. They want to have more sequels. They want to continue the franchise.
Right.
To me, this is such a better film than what Afterlife was in that respect.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. It's more of a jumping on point rather than a wrapping up point, right? Like Afterlife is very much a, like, let's wrap up some, like, we're going to revitalize and bring back a narrative, but we're also going to wrap up a lot of emotional stuff for people who are long-term fans of this franchise and who have a character to say goodbye to, you know? And so it requires a sense of understanding of the prior franchise for you to really understand the full value of the story, you know? Whereas this is something where, like, I could show this to my niece when she turns 7, like, let's watch a Ghostbusters movie, and she could identify with it, you know, without having to know who all these characters necessarily were, which I think is really important. Yeah.
I feel like it's also a nice mingling, though, of old and new in the respects, not necessarily the actors on screen, which, I mean, it is,
yeah,
but the way films were and the way films are. It does have that big summer blockbuster feel going to it, like you would see like in a Marvel film, but at the same time, it is still very much Ghostbusters. It's the real Ghostbusters. It has the ties to the original film. So it's a really nice mingling, I find.
Yeah, it's a really good way of putting it. Tony?
My favorite thing is having the washer and dryer in the basement right next to the containment unit. That's my favorite thing. No, I mean, I did really love that. And it is kind of one of the things that I did really love is kind of included in this is the OGs, but I include the firehouse in that. Was to get your Bill Murray as Peter Venkman again, and really good Peter Venkman, to get Ray Stantz, to get Winston Zeddemore, and to get Annie Potts back, and really good Annie Potts, and even Walter Peck, and all the OGs and like the original things, and Slimer included too, are all handled well, feel like those characters. It's amazing to see them. You get to really get into the nitty gritty of the firehouse and learn more about the floors and see where the kitchen is and how it is to actually live there. And the one shot, I think, is shot with a drone that goes down the pole and all that stuff is amazing. And just to have another chance to visit some of my favorite characters that have ever been on screen, and it felt like have been a part of my life forever. And the argument between Ray and Winston, just that really hit me hard. Like, it was so great to see those characters together and see their emotion, and Ray all hyped up and Winston yelling at him to shut up. Like, that was just great. But it's just really grateful for another opportunity with those guys back, and you get to see them suit up again, and they're not just cameos at the end like everybody kind of complains about Afterlife.
Yeah.
They really feel like more part of the movie, and it was great to see them all again.
I'm going to throw in there as one of my favorite things, also a thing I was right about, which makes me, of course, excited because I was right about something, and we all know how I feel about that at this point. But I really like the notion that the future of Ghostbusters is family oriented. Like, it's a weird thing to consider, but I kind of said going into this movie like that we're going to see this orientation and switch because all of a sudden it is the Spengler family that is like sort of the driving force of this narrative. Like, that's who the future of Ghostbusters is. like we're going to see our other characters at some point not be around as an inevitability, right? Like if this narrative continues and the story continues, then like just by the way the world works and by physics, eventually our other actors are not going to be around the same way that Harold is no longer around, right? And so that means that you have this sort of moving forward of having to re-centralize who is the core of this narrative and who that is. Like, what does that look like? And coming out of Afterlife, it was, you know who your characters are, but you don't know what the dynamic is going to be. You don't know what the vibe is going to be between them as a sort of like family unit. And I really like the idea that like they are a family of Ghostbusters. Like they're figuring out how to be a weird, like, you know, reformed, reconstituted, chosen family. But like the OG Ghostbusters are very much that. They're a chosen family of like people who've chosen to do things together. And sometimes they go their separate ways and they have rifts and they don't stick together, etc. Whereas like we know the future of Ghostbusting is the Spengler family. And I think that that offers up a lot of opportunity and potential for onboarding fans and things because it's understanding a family dynamic in the storytelling as opposed to a business dynamic, if that makes sense, right? It's no longer a story between different business partners who are working together. It's a story between a family that are out there who bust ghosts. And in terms of like kid media and animated series and toys and things, I just think it's a better framework, you know, to sort of like be building from than the OG stuff, you know, which is kind of convoluted to a kid, you know, like, oh yeah, they're former professors who are out of work as their dean decided that their work was not particularly worth funding anymore. And so did the rest of their institution. So they decided to become a new company and franchise the rights to it. Like that's all, I love all that. But like for a new onboarding fan, that's all extra baggage they don't ever need to understand or know to get why Ghostbusters works as it is. And instead it can be about, you know, a mom, a stepdad, a kid, the neighbor kid who's friends with them, whose parents are like never around. And there's more opportunity to engage that for people, I think, in general. So some people are going to hate that. I'm going to say that now. Like some people are going to hear me say that and go, that's what makes this awful. And like, I'm sorry if you feel that way. But like, I think that the future of Ghostbusters has to in some way shift to talk to kids and talk to, you know, a next generation of people who are going to come on and be fans of it. And making this a family story is a way that I think does that.
Yeah, and I think, especially when you look at that family dynamic and why the first Ghostbusters resonated so well with so many of us in our youth is it takes the fear of things away. It takes the fear of the unknown away. And like, if you have to do that with your family and you can remove those fear things, like, I think that's why I was, you know, how many kids you know that are scared of the dark? Well, if you pretend to be a Ghostbuster, you don't have to be afraid anymore.
Right.
And like that speaks to like some of the most fundamental core values that we have as humans. I mean, I think even Harold Ramis used to speak to that, right? It's a game that kids could play together as a team, right? Where you're going out hunting imaginary ghosts and you're also working together and it builds teamwork and camaraderie, but it can also create that family element, which I think really goes a long way for empowering an audience to not be afraid of things, like take those spooky things head on. And, you know, it's pretty incredible the way that these things can do that. But I do got to throw back and say that the other thing that's my most favorite part of this, and I don't know how I completely overlooked it, was we start a Ghostbusters movie and they're in business.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, oh my God. You know how long I've waited for that? They're just in business and they're out there doing their thing. Like, perfect. Sold. Like right when you walk in, sold.
Wouldn't that have been great if the opening scene is them cruising down New York City streets like that just to another birthday party? And Paul Rudd and they're singing the song. Wow.
It was what if it opened with a poem that was about birthdays, right? As opposed to being a Robert Frost poem. I mean, but it's kind of true. Like it's a movie that opens with a Robert Frost poem, an action sequence involving firefighters, and cuts to a car chase. Right. It's just like, it's vastly different from these other movies we've seen where you get some sort of paranormal event and then a cut to a, you know, conversation between two people. Yeah, so it is something I think that is a really good thing to point out. The tone of this movie and its action driven, like sort of pace to it. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think you're right. I think it's one of the things that's really best about it, you know? The other thing I want to ask you about, you know, coming out of this movie, you've all seen it multiple times now. where do you think this leaves us? Like, what's the storytelling potential that you're excited about for the future coming out of this movie? Like, I've kind of touched on this idea that it means that maybe it re-centralizes the narrative around a family unit a bit. And I think that's very cool about it. But for you, like, what do you think is the potentiality for the future Ghostbusters stories to come, given what you saw on screen several times?
I'm really excited for, honestly, the fact that we do have these added characters now, to see them evolve, to see where they're going to turn up next. I mean, the Ghostbusters VR game Rise of the Ghost Lord, they're doing their Frozen Empire update, and it involves Podcast, Lucky, and Lars Pinfield. And like, that's the only 3 that have been listed. There could be more, maybe, hopefully, maybe, I don't know. But none of those characters were lead characters in Frozen Empire. So to actually have them as like the leads in this add-on, that's pretty exciting. And to think about, okay, if they do a Ghostbusters animated series, which obviously that is happening with Netflix, a Ghostbusters animated feature film, the next movie, to see these characters kind of get their own due, because I could definitely see Lars, or I could see, Patton Oswalt's character kind of becoming a larger role in those kind of side projects. And then when they return for that next big film, you got a little bit of added backstory there. Or just when it comes to that new audience, there's now that connection there. They know that character a little more, even though they may have just seen him or her in, animation for the past year or so. There's at least some more foundation there for that character. So I'm just really excited for the world building. I'm excited for the character building. I would say that's probably the 2 biggest things. And obviously too, the fact that they have caught Garaka now, I don't think they're going to retread with Gozer. I don't think they're going to retread with Vigo or anything like that. I'm looking forward to seeing what the next big bad is, because with Garaka, I mean, they changed that formula of what that big bad can be, what a ghost can be. It's no longer that kind of human form. I mean, it definitely could be, obviously, but Garaka was very much real Ghostbusters, Extreme Ghostbusters kind of inspired. It had that look, it had that design to it. So just the fact that now it seems like the shackles are off, and really the franchise can go anywhere, both in story and possibly in location.
Yeah, I agree. That's pretty cool. I like the idea of like ghost stories in other places. I think that would be really neat to see for sure. Tony, what do you think?
I think Jason said it perfectly. I think that's really set up. I think they've kind of, there's not really that much more like nostalgia that they can really bank on than like keep it in New York and do all that. I think this one really scratched the itch, at least for me, for that. Like I'm ready, and I think they're prepared with what they've done with this movie and with Afterlife to expand the world, move it somewhere else, kind of break off the characters, add some new characters in. Like Lars Pinfield, he's probably my favorite new character. I would love to see more with him.
Sure.
They've kind of proven that it can be like a Netflix series. You could, have a spin-off series that could be like just the research facility and all the antics and stuff that happens in there and all the craziness. And I think it's really opened up to they can just go anywhere they want now. But I think we have kind of with this one gotten everything we can out of the originals, and with New York too. And it's ready to, if it's going to keep going, I hope it does go in new, crazier, more adventurous ways. And this movie does kind of set it up for that.
It's kind of funny, but like I said going into this movie that I would be okay with them burning down the firehouse. That like, if originally I was like, they could destroy the Ecto-1 and that would be okay and we get a new car. And then they showed us what the Ecto-1 was going to look like and they redid it. And I was like, don't destroy it. It's really nice. I love it. But I was still like, they could wreck the firehouse, like, and they could move on to somewhere else. And that could be like, Bruce Wayne burning down the Batcave, but then still being Batman and moving into the shadows elsewhere, or doing whatever else, to set up a secondary base or be in a clock tower or something. And in the end, like, I'm glad they didn't destroy the firehouse. I mean, they kind of did. It's pretty messed up, but like, presumably it's still there. But like, I feel like you're right that like it opens up a lot of space to kind of go somewhere else. Like the New York story, and then, Jason's saying this too, like the New York story it's not necessarily done. There'll always be stories to tell in New York, but like, it's okay at this point to kind of like move forward from there to other places and spaces, based off folklore and stuff. Justin, what were you going to add?
Well, I was going to say, I think that's to me the most exciting thing is the potential that there is opened. Every door is open now, right? I could see if you want to go like low stakes, there's several TV shows they could easily make about this. Like I would love a show of Ray and podcast hanging out, doing their thing. The research lab could be its own show, right? And then carrying these things on. But then the fact that, we've got Lars, he's got his, James A. Caster has his British accent. So obviously he's from somewhere else, came over here for a compelling job. So he sets up the opportunity for international. While at the same time, we still haven't finished Phoebe's coming of age story, right? And I think like that's a natural progression, but I don't think that has to be the next story now. I think we can circle back to that when the timing is right or when the story is right, but you have other options to go. So we can do spinoffs if you want. Like you can get as carried away as your imagination can go, but we have some really good stand-up points with good characters that we like and have established enough that they can carry some media on their own without any other interaction. If you do the, Lucky just working as an intern or, on the payroll there at the research lab with Lars, that could be the setup to another movie itself very easily, right? And you can bring anyone back that you want, or you can kind of have those through lines, but they're not a requirement anymore. No one in this movie, like this ensemble cast, is not required for whatever is next. You have the option to branch things out and make the tree branch, right? We have the foundation, we have the trunk, but now we have the ability to fill in the tree and the branches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that like for me, I like the idea that we have a paranormal research like division that is backed up by a billionaire who's throwing money at it. Like, look, one of my favorite things about this entire movie that's kind of just overlooked is this ionic separator device, right? It's this idea that like they don't have to wait for ghosts to manifest. They can take a haunted object or any object they think may be haunted. They can detect the PKE in it and they can then draw and extract the ghost out of it and contain it, which means like there's all this new potentiality for like how ghost busting works and sort of what the business of ghost busting is, like, as opposed to, hey, we're chasing after things and we're shooting with laser guns. Like a portion of the business is going to be like, ridding haunted items of spirits. Like, and to me, it's like weird to consider that, but it's like, how there's like the iFixit shop for your iPhone or like your cell phone, you could go and like take your broken screen to. Like, what if in malls there's just like the Ghostbusters ghost detection and destruction facility where like you bring your haunted Discman and they just treat it for you and hand it back to you. Like, it's just the ideas of how Ghostbusters might operate from being a run and gun scenario to more of like different applications of paranormal research and investigation is something that I think is so cool. And I want to see so much more of. Like, I want to see how Ghostbusters as a business and as a like technology and a culture sort of can shift away from just being like an action shoot 'em up kind of thing with some quips and jokes to instead being things that, have technology and devices for detecting and inspecting and all these different cool things that they can do. And so that's one of the things I love about this research lab concept is that there's just so much more we haven't seen yet that they may have in the works. Like if you had told me years ago and during the 84 movie that there was ever going to be a Ghostbusters movie where they would have a device that separated living spirits from their bodies and turn them into ghost form, I'd be like, well, that's kind of weird. Don't they do ghost busting as opposed to ghost creating? But like, I mean, clearly they're on both sides. The door swings both ways. Like,
I feel like with the additions that we got in Frozen Empire, and I've kind of thought this for a while, but really, again, with what we saw in the movie, I think Ghostbusters could honestly hit its stride on television, weekly series, almost Law and Order style, where you've got different things. Like you've got, Ghostbusters R&D, and then you just have your flagship Ghostbusters. And you have all these other like little side things. I know some people out there, they're going to cry, oh, don't, water it down and don't stretch it too thin. You're going to ruin things. I'm always up for more Ghostbusters. That may not be good for some people. Some may be like, oh, you're going to like everything. Well, probably. I'm probably pretty biased, to be honest. I mean, if it's Ghostbusters, I'm already in the door. I'm opening it up. I'm ready to take a look. I'm ready to watch it. But I really feel like Ghostbusters could do even bigger and better on television. if it was like an HBO series or, just a syndicated, but I don't know. I mean, it lends itself so perfectly to that, where you do have that story, that one big story that can go through the entire season. You've got smaller busts that are individual episodes, but very much like a Law and Order or, Criminal Minds or anything like that. You've got that narrative that just kind of gets slipped in through the episodes that they tell throughout that series. Or
it's weird to think about it, but Supernatural was a TV series that was on from 2005 to 2020, right? It's 15 years of a show that was literally making references to Ghostbusters, at different points. And it was very much we're going to explore different elements of the supernatural and the paranormal. And it's not necessarily tied to being in New York, and it's not necessarily tied to being, just ghosts or whatever. And so, I think you're right. I think that they could really do a television series that would be really interesting and compelling. And especially what they've set up here at a narrative level creates the ground for that. You've got a paranormal research center. You've got the idea that all these ghosts have been let out that now need to presumably get recaught, or, at least we got to do something with them because they're all out there in the world, So I don't know if we're going to get a live action TV series. Nobody's ever talked about it. Maybe this is where the animated series will go, but I'm thrilled. I have to say, coming out of this movie, I've said going into the movie that this was the best time to be a Ghostbusters fan. We had more saturation and more opportunities at media level than we've ever had, even at the peak of real Ghostbusters, in terms of video games, in terms of movies, in terms of animated series and development, etc. This is peak Ghostbusters, even if you think 1989 was, right? But the opportunities going forward are so huge, and what the narrative has the potential to do from here is great. The fundamental flaw of Ghostbusters 2 is that it rehashes Ghostbusters 1 and doesn't really leave you anywhere new to go. That's the thing. I love that movie too, but where do you go from there? Oscar will be a Ghostbuster someday, a concept that people clung to for way too long, even up until 2 weeks ago. Because they're he's going to be in this movie, right? But where does Ghostbusters 2 leave you in terms of the development of Ghostbusters, right? And Afterlife has to be a movie that resets you. This is a movie that takes you somewhere new and that gives you opportunities and places to go forward from. And so I'm so grateful for it. I'm so glad we got a movie that is fun and interactive, that we all are excited about, and that you're, on board with from the moment it opens, in a really fun adventure that you want to stick around for until the end. I'll ask you each what you think about this. What's your overall score that you have to give this movie? And we'll do it out of 100% because Justin wants it.
Yeah, I just think for uniformity, you have to have a grading scale, right? There's so many websites that 5 stars. I'm 5 stars is a terrible system. Who decided on 5? Why would you cut 10 in half? What, are you
Each
crazy?
of those 5 stars represents 20% of a score, right?
Exactly. So if you're going to grade everything on a grade school or an academic version, right? 0 to 100%, right? I think that's pretty fair.
As a teacher, I endorse this. Yes.
It's easy to understand.
Yeah.
Pretty much everyone understands it. They get it. I give it an 87, right? It's not quite that A. It's not a mid B. It's a high B. And I think there's lots of things that are great in it. And I really like the potential that it leaves us with. But it gives me everything I wanted to see in a Ghostbusters movie. I got to see ghostbusting. I got to see a flashback for the first time. There's so much in this that you can carry on and just make great in the future. But the watchability of this, the reviews, the repeat viewings are all very high for me. So I'm going to watch this a lot.
I'm going to see it again next week. That's, I hear you. Tony?
I'll give it a 78 of 100 is where I'm lying. There's way more good stuff in it that I appreciate and love to outweigh any of my nitpicks and negatives. So, but it's almost too much and not enough of some things. But yeah, overall, it's probably my 4th favorite Ghostbusters movie of the 5, but not in a bad way. In rewatchability, like Jason said, it's probably my 2nd. Ghostbusters 2 is still number 1, and rewatchability, this one's probably number 2. Kind of got to be in a mood to watch Afterlife, and I've seen the first Ghostbusters so many times that I don't know. But yeah, I give it a yeah, I'm happy with that grade with it. Yeah.
Okay. So
You gave it
you're
a
a C
high
plus
C?
man.
He's
Yeah.
a high C guy.
A high C, yeah, perfect.
Sorry, I had to.
It's the Ecto Cooler score of the week. Yeah, that's
Yeah, it's fair to say because there's a lot that after 3 viewings, I think I've had plenty of time to think about where it just gives you just a little bit, but you want more, and it feels more like a television series than it does like an actual like blockbuster movie type of thing to me. But it doesn't take away from it. I still have a ton of fun. I can't wait to watch it at home. I might see it again like you, Jim. I'm not going to hate it. There's nothing to hate, really. There's more negatives are all just nitpicks and stuff that I would like to see more of, basically. So, yeah, a high C is the perfect score for me.
I love that. Jason?
Yes. Well, I already posted my review online, which I gave it an 8.5. So I guess mathematically I'd be an 85 here. I really enjoyed the film. I do have, some nitpicks here. Again, I thought the third act just came on a little too fast. And even on the second viewing, I still kind of feel like that. It not as bad. I think to me it was just some of the awkward edits, like, in that moment, you all of a sudden have Pukey in the firehouse, and you have James Acaster hunting him down, and it's like, for a second, I'm like, why is Pukey here?
But then he says, and he goes, "How'd you get up here?"
But that's the problem. Now I'm wondering, and I'm taken out of the moment, and then all of a sudden it's like, here comes Garaka, and just little things like that. That's what kind of holds it back for me from being that that big A rating or what have you. But overall, yeah, I'm a fan of it. I'm excited to see where the franchise is going to go. I hope that the numbers continue to go in terms of the box office. I know we got Godzilla Kong next week, which is probably going to give it a pretty big thrashing, I would say. But I hope Ghostbusters can kind of continue. Again, pulling in just a pretty fair box office this week. And when we get the international numbers in, and we can just kind of see this franchise continue, grow, more projects coming. I'm just excited as to the future of the franchise.
I need to say this because you brought it up. I think that Godzilla movie looks stupid, and I hope that this Ghostbusters movie thrashes it in the box office because I think that Godzilla movie looks stupid. And here's how stupid that Godzilla movie looks to me. I watched the trailer for that, and then immediately after it, I saw the trailer for The Fall Guy, and I didn't know what I was watching was the trailer for The Fall Guy. And for months, I've been saying, like, why are they making a movie about the Fall Guy? Like, that's the most random property that, like, somebody dug into their bin of, like, so what properties do we own anyway? To, like, figure out to make a Fall Guy movie. And then I watched the trailer for the Godzilla Kong movie, and I went, well, that looks stupid. And then the trailer for the Fall Guy came on. I had no idea what it was, and I went, well, that looks kind of interesting. And then it said The Fall Guy, and I went, that only looked interesting because of that stupid Godzilla movie. So, like, that's my take on the Godzilla movie, and why I hope Ghostbusters continues to do well at the box office, although I recognize it is the next event film. For me, I feel kind of weird. I feel like I might have the highest score here, which I'm surprised about. I'm usually the person who I think is often cynical about things and nitpicky, and I'm going to give this thing like an 89. Like, I'm having a hard time not giving it a 90. Like, it's one of those things where it's like a paper that reads really well and it's a real joy to read through. And then, like, you also know it has some mechanical things that kind of just make you not want to go, oh, it's kind of an 89 and not a 90. If you just did these couple of things, it would have been an A- paper. I really liked this movie a lot. I watched it and was really happy to be there in every time that I saw it, and didn't go, oh, I got to get through this third screening. And I saw it twice in a row. And I want to say that, like, people are going to say I saw it 3 or 4 times. Like, I literally sat through 4 hours of this movie, like in a row. And I didn't sit there at the end of the second time, oh God, I gotta get out of here finally. Like, no, I enjoyed both of my viewings of that movie back to back, like after having seen it already, because it's something that's just fun and easy to sort of like ride along with. And it's enjoyable. And it has some, things that I think are like, I think we can all agree. I think that there's a fair criticism to say that the third act is a little bit rushed. And I think that, like, given that Gil Kenan has now come out, like, in an article in the last 24 hours saying, like, he hopes that people get to see the deleted scenes, like, that's a different take. Like, Jason Reitman's take was like, the movie that's out there is the director's cut. Like, that was his version of events about Afterlife, even though we suspected there was more of it. In this case, we're sitting around talking about how there's a third act we feel is rushed. And the director of that movie is saying, like, I hope that the fans get to see the things that didn't make it in the movie. So, like, and not because I think he's not proud of the cut they made, but just because Gil Kenan is ever, like, a fan. Like, every interaction we've had a lot with him along the way has been about how he's a fan of this franchise just as much as we are. And if there's more for us to see about our characters, he wants us to see it too. So I would give this thing like an 89%. And I'm not sure how I rank it, alongside the others. Like, I think if I had to give my score to, like, the original Ghostbusters, I'm like, it's a 96.5. Like, even that doesn't get my 100% score because nothing is ever perfect. But, like, to be at an 89 to a 96.5 is probably pretty good. And I'm almost a little surprised. Like, I think I liked this movie more than I thought I was going to. Like, and that's weird to say as a person who runs a Ghostbusters podcast every week and is like, I love everything Ghostbusters. But, like, I said at certain points that I was worried about character development and how many people were in this movie and all kinds of stuff. And once my butt was in a seat, all of that went out the window. Like, all of that became irrelevant because the story was so much fun. And that means that everyone who was involved in making the movie did an amazing job. Because if you can leave all that baggage behind you as you just strap in and enjoy a movie, it means the movie was made well. So, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's very fair.
And I think also when it comes to, like, some of the new characters in there, I mean, Patton's character, it serves that direct purpose. You've got Emily, you've got Kumail, direct purpose, but at the same time, there's this, they're not a base character. They're not new Ghostbusters. There's a different dimension, a different aura with those two. So I think you can kind of accept them a little easier, and especially when it comes to the Melody character, like Emily Ellen Lynn's character, you don't really need to know too much. I mean, really all you need to know is this is how she perished. And then you start connecting the dots in your brain as to, okay, how is she going to go to the other side?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I think your mind kind of takes you there. And then when it comes to Kumail, it's just that great burn when it comes to him and the, pun intended, that great burn with him and the other characters, and getting to know him and more about him. And you were kind of mentioning earlier when it came to, like, him doing sneakers and such like that, that's kind of shady salesman to a degree. And by the end of it, you're kind of cheering on this guy. He is the fire master. Yeah, I was really surprised with how they juggled these new characters and the fact that everything, for the most part, worked. Again, I know in my I mentioned there was, I want more podcast. I want more, Ernie Hudson, or Winston Zeddemore. There are specific things. But for what we did get, especially Danny Aykroyd, Ray Stantz, who at this point, I mean, they're the same. They're merged.
Hey,
those performances.
He even answered questions for us on the carpet about Ray Stantz using the pronoun I.
Yeah.
So yeah. I think he knows that they're one and the same at this point. Yeah, I think you're right. Like, it was a great movie. It continues to be. I'm going to go see it again next week in 35 millimeter is my plan. Because I haven't seen a 35 millimeter print yet. But I'm trying to take the movie in all the ways possible before it's not in theaters. And I'm sure that you all are probably going to see it at least one more time before it leaves a big screen environment. But I think this is a great film. I think we've all kind of hit on what we enjoy about it and we love about it and where our small nitpicks are. But, if you haven't seen this movie yet, if you somehow listened to 2 hours and 5 minutes or whatever it is, this podcast, and you went, man, I wonder if I should go see that movie. Like, yeah, of course you go see the movie. It's great. It's phenomenal. And if you listen to this podcast and you somehow were involved in the making of this movie, and I don't really expect that anybody is, like, I don't think that, like, Gil Kenan's out there, like, gotta turn on the Extraplasm this week. Here it is. But, like, if you're listening out there and you helped make this movie, thank you. Because this was a great film to enjoy. And I'm so excited about what, we have coming up down the pike for us in terms of Ghostbusters. If we had any worries about what's happening with the animated series, Gil Kenan has also put out comments this week saying that he has been in meetings recently, seeing sort of preview materials and storyboards and things for the animated series to come on, I think, Netflix, right? Is that where that's supposed to show up?
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's a great time to be a Ghostbusters fan. And if you have seen the movie already, go again. Go make it successful. Go spend some more money. Go to a matinee screening. I don't care. Just go spend money to make sure we see another Ghostbusters movie because, helping to support the movie is what gets us another movie. And I'm not saying that just because I'm some sort of shill. I don't make any money at all. I just spend money on Ghostbusters and then tell you all about it. But I think we all can benefit from more Ghostbusters in our lives. And we have such a great group of people who are producing this content. Who are committed to the characters that they've created and who are doing a phenomenal job of giving us everything we could hope for as fans. So any final words, any final comments, things to plug, anything you want to throw out there before we sign off for this week?
I'll just say I think you're all great, excellent people. I really appreciate our conversation here. I think everyone's doing solid work. And if you like what you're hearing, check out Strange Glow Video. Obviously, you're well aware of Ghostbusters news. Hopefully, you know all about Phantasm Toys because they're putting out some of the greatest Ghostbusters collectibles on the market.
Appreciate that.
And Jim over here at Extraplasm is doing a good job of bringing us all together to have one big group hug.
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate that. I'm not sure if it's always a great job, but it's a job. But and I'm trying to do it. Tony, anything you want to throw out there?
Yeah, I'm just happy to be on here with you three great content creators and guys that I got to be around in person again. Thankfully, a big thank to Eric Reich and Ghost Corps and everything they did for the premiere events and helping make us fans be a huge part of it as much as they could with what was going on in New York. And I'm excited for the future. I mean, this movie checked a lot of boxes for me. My favorite things in Ghostbusters are like the tech, the gadgets, the Ghostbusting gear. Got plenty of that. The ghosts, like my second favorite thing, and the special effects got plenty of that. And the characters got plenty of the original and the new. And just overall, it's just like Jim said, it's the best time to be a Ghostbusters fan since 1989, which coincidentally is the score for this movie. So we got High C in 89. So
I will also say that people should go over to Phantasm Toys and go check out your Frozen Firehouses, which are now available, I believe, on pre-order, correct?
Yep, we got the Frozen Firehouses, and just like with this movie, our library lady is back and better than ever. Made her more translucent, so she lights up brighter, and a more detailed book with actual pages in it, detailed pages, and comes on our classic collector-friendly packaging. And
I mean, look, I'm not going to lie. I own a Mattel library lady, but what you've done with that one was always amazing beforehand. And now that it lights up and comes on collector-friendly packaging, I'm like, damn, that makes my library lady look like just kind of just resin junk. I'm kidding, but like mine's still awesome. So is Jason's, but because we're part of a club of people who with Matt Cardona, never forget, because I had to tell him that to his face at a movie premiere. But one of the key things, I had to stop him and let him know that he was part of an exclusive club of people who own a library lady. Yeah, I'm really professional and mature, but you make an amazing library lady figure, and if you don't have one for your collection, you should totally check it out. Go over to phantasmtoys.com and see what Tony's got available. And if you missed out on, being at the premiere, the Frozen Firehouse that he's got coming out is essentially just like the one that he had at the Yes Have Some party and at the premiere and gave to folks, except it doesn't have the date on the side of it. Instead, it has an awesome sculpt of Garaka, which I'm gonna be honest, like it looks really cool. Like I almost wish it was on the one that had the date on it. So
I originally did. Like this was always, I was going to have like the silhouette of Garaka, but with putting the text on top and cracks and all the ice details, like it got really messy and lost. So
yeah,
I thought this was a good way to keep the premiere one special and still have one that everybody else can enjoy. And I'm really happy with how it turned out.
It's all good. I'm just going to take the one you gave me and put it on eBay, get hundreds of dollars, buy the other one that's really cheap and just keep it as a replica and be like, I have the memories. We're being paid with memories, everyone. That's what we're all here doing.
Yes, we are. Friendship and memories.
That's right. That's one of my favorite lines in the entire movie is anytime anybody asks me, does your podcast compensate? No, we're being paid with the memories. That's Jason, anything you want to throw out there as final words this week?
Well, I mean, I've just had a wonderful time this evening here chatting with all you fine gentlemen. love all the content that you guys have been cranking out. And when it comes to really just Ghostbusters, I mean, in general, I again, I know I mentioned on last week's show, I do want to thank Ghost Corps, Sony Pictures, Eric Reich, everybody for providing myself and also Jim, really, I mean, everybody on this podcast, to have the chance to watch Ghostbusters Frozen Empire at the world premiere. Was an amazing experience. I mean, don't tell my wife, but I mean, it may be the greatest day of my life. Just don't. She doesn't listen to this, I don't think. Hopefully not. I don't know. But yeah.
If she does, I'm going to get really angry emails like this.
Probably. But yeah, no, it was just an amazing time in New York City. And really, when it comes to what's coming up next, I mean, honestly, for the past like 3-4 months, I've had this like weird pit in my stomach because every single day I've got to jump into the realm of Ghostbusters and report on a film that I was kind of unsure of to some degree. So the fact that it's out now, there's this really nice sense of ease. And this coming week, I mean, there is new content coming to Ghostbusters Rise of the Ghost Lord. There's new content coming to Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed. We've got a Hasbro reveal on the horizon, which sounds very exciting.
Yeah, very exciting.
So there's this really nice sense, at least for me, of like, I feel rejuvenated, feel excited as to what's to come. And even though Frozen Empire is out, just, of course, be sure to keep checking out GhostbustersNews.com and our YouTube channel, as there is still a lot of stuff happening within the Ghostbusters world. And, of course, we're gonna be tallying all the box office numbers and everything throughout the next couple weeks, like we did with Afterlife, to just a frightening degree, making people sick of reporting on Japanese box offices and how it did in the UK and everything. But no, I'm just excited for all the other projects that are going to be hitting over the next little while. Again, video game stuff. We got toy stuff on the horizon. Dark Horse Comics.
Yeah.
We've got the in-between between Afterlife and Frozen Empire. To me, again, I think we've just kind of scratched the surface to this year, especially with the 40th anniversary coming up in, mere months.
That was the perfect closeout because you just said everything I was thinking about. And I think if you're on the PlayStation, you can get Spirits Unleashed for 35% off right now, I think is what I saw going on. If you haven't picked it up yet, play it. It's a great game. It's so much fun.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. I've spent more than 60 days inside that universe, and I'm saying that not with shame, I assure you. I want to say, as we wrap up this episode of Extraplasm, like, is this the last time we're going to talk about this movie? Probably not. There's a really good chance that we'll be talking about it for weeks to come, and there's lots of premiere stories still to tell with folks who were there, who we may hear from on the podcast to come to visit with us. But this has been an amazing few weeks of talking about this movie and being in New York, and to not be in New York with all three of you almost hurts. Because it was so fun to be with all three of you in New York. But I'm so glad we got together to have this conversation online, to chat about sort of our reviews of the movie and our second viewings, etc. I want to say thank you, just as you all have, to Eric Reich, to Ghost Corps, to Gil Kennan, to Jason Reitman, to all the cast and crew of Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, to everybody at Sony Pictures who made this movie possible, who helped to allow us to be present, to see it firsthand at the premiere. Keep listening to Extraplasm, because if nothing else, like, there's plenty of new Ghostbusters content that's coming on the horizon, and this is not the end at all. Time is but a window. Ghostbusters will rise again, something along those lines. But I appreciate all three of you for coming on the show. Thank you so much. And obviously, don't be strangers. You're all always welcome here. You're great contributors, and I love hanging out with you and talking about Ghostbusters. Is the greatest thing to talk about, and the most fun people to do it with. So thank you once again, and we'll talk to you each soon.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys. We'll talk to you again. That about wraps things up for Extraplasm this week. I want to say one final thank you to Jason, Justin, and Tony for coming on the show this week and for talking with us about, our sort of individual experiences now, rather than our shared experience at the premiere with Frozen Empire, and how the movie's sort of grown on us in multiple viewings and changed for us in terms of seeing it in different contexts. I hope that you have seen the movie and that you are seeing it multiple times. And if you've got things you want to share about that, you can, of course, reach me at Extraplasm on Instagram or X, extraplasompodcast at gmail.com via email, or Extraplasm Podcast on Facebook or YouTube. Of course, I want to say thank you as usual to Brendan Pearce of Badoochi Studios, who provides our logo and the visual identity for the podcast. And I want to say thank you to vaporwave artist MAGNAVOX, whose version of Ghostbusters serves as our theme song each week. And of course, I want to say thank you to you, because you make all of this worthwhile. Without you listening to the podcast, there wouldn't be a lot of reason to make it. So thank you for tuning in each week, for being active people who engage, in commenting and sharing. If you have anything you want to share with the podcast, of course, hit me at all the places I just told you that you can a moment ago. But, be well, enjoy this time of seeing a movie on the big screen. See it on the biggest screen you can, then go see it on the weirdest screen you can, like a Screen X, then go see it in 40X and see if it smells weird, then go see it in something else like D-Box that moves. See the movie every way you can, and while you do, try to remember what Ernie Hudson says to us every week.
Try to have fun, and always keep on busting. Take care.